And we're here. Good evening, viewers, and thank you so much for joining Kat and myself on Deep Space Wine, our alcohol-fueled rewatch of Deep Space Nine. But it's not a rewatch. I saw it back in the 90s when it was first syndicated in the UK. Kat has never seen Deep Space Nine despite having watched many other installments of the franchise. So between us, we explore every episode of Deep Space Nine, discussing what we like, what we don't, and going off on mad tangents about great cinematography.
Tim, I'm just going to pause you for a moment because
Yes.
what I can see in Twitch is that the Blogging Goth content is intended for certain audiences. The chat room is live, but I'm not certain that we're actually streaming the video.
Goodness me. Chat,
Or
let
the
me
sound.
know, because on my device I can definitely see us.
It might just be me.
Oh dear.
Yeah, the Endocat says they're right. It might just be my computer that's... Well, I don't know why I can't get in. Sorry, everybody.
I'm terribly sorry, everyone. I thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Tender of Orchards. I think this is a hangover from I was gaming recently using my Twitch channel, and I may have left it set to a mature audience. So that's
I
my
hadn't
fault.
told it. That's my fault for not telling it that I was a mature audience. That's on me. Apologies.
Well, it is the usual bumpy start to the show, and we have been away for a few weeks as well. So forgive your humble presenters our rustiness with this damned Cardassian technology that refuses to work. But that's the setup, the premise for those of you joining us for the first time. Thank you very much. Cat content is too mature for Cat. Yes, well, that's a very good point. Cat is restricted from seeing themselves.
I mean, if you've seen any of the things I've said about Star Trek Online, that's very probably true. I shouldn't be allowed.
I think it's probably good news for our content warning that Q does not turn up too much in this series. Otherwise, I'm sure that we would simply overload with smut and implication. But no, we are indeed finally at that vaunted moment. We are at the Series 1 finale of Deep Space Nine, which is fantastic news. So, as I've done a slightly rambling intro, I'm going to hand over to Kat, who will get us set up. So, Kat, please take it away from me.
Thank you, Tim. The first thing I wanted to share this week is that I commissioned a picture, which I would like to share with you, from one of my favourite webcomic artists. It's Randall K. Milholland, or R.K. Milholland, who runs the Something Positive, who designs and makes the Something Positive webcomic, which Tim has a t-shirt from, because it's a bloody good webcomic. You should check it out.
We love them.
And what I asked for was a very quick sketch of... There's a cat in the comic called Choo Choo Bear who can melt into a liquid, stretch into any shape he wants. It's basically Odo in cat form. So I asked for a picture of Choo Choo Bear just melted in Odo's bucket. And bless him, Randy Milholland made this gorgeous image of Odo holding his bucket with Choo Choo Bear in it. It's absolutely adorable and I love it to bits.
And there we are. I'm sharing it with the channel now, and it is beautiful. It is a wonderful picture of both of them. And yeah, it's incredible. You immediately can see that they're stood on the promenade with those lovely windows behind them, and it's immediately perceptibly Odo.
Yeah, and his uniform is right. The little bucket's got little details that Odo's bucket has. And Choo Choo Bear is looking at him so lovingly. I absolutely adore it. It makes me so happy.
So thank you so much for commissioning that, Kat, and thank you, R.K. Mulholland, for illustrating it. And what a wonderful crossover of our interests. Both Kat and I enjoyed reading Something Positive, which has been running for decades now. One of the longest running webcomics.
I think it's got to be over 20 years at this point,
Easily.
and he's still doing it.
Easily.
Wonderful.
And it's great. It's a great, very cynical but very funny and heartwarming strip as well. We strongly recommend it. So thank you so much. Very much.
But now, moving on to more Star Trek themed Star Trek topics. Tonight we'll be discussing, as you said, In the Hands of the Prophets, which was first aired on the 21st of June 1993. It was directed by David Livingston, who I always think of as the guy that Picard's fish was named after.
That's right.
We
are good on the trivia.
And it was written by Robert Hewitt Wolfe, who got involved with Star Trek when he sent in the script for The Next Generation's A Fistful of Datas, which is the ridiculous holodeck episode where Data has plugged himself into the computer and he gradually becomes every single character in a Wild West holodeck game. It's a beautiful script. It's a really lovely episode. And it got him a place on the writing staff of Deep Space Nine. So good on you, Robert.
And he will deliver many more episodes that are absolutely superb, and is very active on social media. So do go find Robert on Twitter and on Tumblr, where he engages very quickly and openly with fans. So I strongly encourage you to look Robert up online. He's great.
I'll do that as soon as I finish Deep Space Nine and can no longer accidentally be spoiled by the writer of the actual episodes.
It's a really good point. Yes, and a good reminder. Chat, thanks for joining us. Please, let's try and preserve Cat's unawareness of what's coming up. They do often see many incomprehensible memes that have spoiled some stuff, but it is wonderful to cherish Cat discovering things for the first time, and we can kind of like vampire off of that. So please resist the urge to spoil anything in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Also, I'm very aware that today the top of my head keeps disappearing. It's because my hair is the colour of a green screen. I apologise. There's nothing I can do about it. So I'm just occasionally going to get distracted and start going to make sure I'm all still here. Content warning for this episode. It has themes of religious fundamentalism, especially in regards to education, and the persecution of secular individuals by religious people. There is a conspiracy to murder, and there is an instance of terrorism in the form of a bomb going off and ensuing fire. So if any of those things are distressing to you, we will have an image of the bomb having gone off, but only a still image. We won't be showing any footage. But yeah, if some of those topics might be sensitive ones for you, please do take discretion and bob out if you need to.
Thank you.
Right, I've got the plot summary from Wikipedia. It's quite a long one this week, so it's a relatively action-heavy episode. So yes, as always, thank you to Wikipedia for providing the plot summary and saving me having to go back and try and write a comprehensible one. Chief Miles O'Brien walks his wife, Keiko, to the school where she teaches students on the station. They discuss Bajoran culture, a topic Miles learned about from Neela, his Bajoran assistant. At the school, Keiko teaches her class about the science of the Bajoran wormhole and the aliens that live inside it. The scientific view is different from the religious approach taken by the Bajorans, who believe the wormhole is the legendary celestial temple inhabited by their prophets, whom they worship as gods. Her class is interrupted by one of Bajor's spiritual leaders, Vedek Wynn. Wynn questions why Keiko does not teach Bajoran religion in her classroom. Afterwards, Keiko reports the incident to Commander Benjamin Sisko. When Sisko asks Wynn about the dispute, she says there may be consequences if Keiko refuses to teach religion. Meanwhile, Miles discovers an important engineering tool is missing, but is distracted when he and Neela discover the remains of a Starfleet ensign. Oh yeah, there's also the remains, but they're not grisly. He's kind of a blob of chewing gum on the floor by the time they find it, unfortunately. It's not very graphic, but it is unpleasant. Outside the school, Wynn and a group of Bajorans protest Keiko's teaching methods. Wynn offers Keiko a solution. All she has to do is simply stop teaching about the wormhole. When Keiko refuses to accept Wynn's proposal, Wynn leads the Bajoran parents to take their children out of school. Sisko visits Vedek Bareil, a more progressive Bajoran cleric, for advice on the problem. Bareil opposes Wynn's views, but he cannot support Sisko as he is attempting to become the next Kai, the leader of the Bajoran religion. Sisko returns to Deep Space Nine and asks for help from Major Kira Nerys, his Bajoran first officer, but she also refuses to help. Meanwhile, Security Chief Odo and Dr. Julian Bashir finish investigating the remains of the Starfleet ensign whom Miles and Neela found earlier. They discover that the ensign was murdered by a phaser when he became aware of someone tampering with the runabout security controls. Later, an explosion occurs inside the empty school, destroying it. Sisko confronts Wynn, blaming her actions for increasing the risk of violence on the station. Neela meets with Wynn, revealing that the two had been working together. She informs Wynn that her escape plan with the runabout will no longer work. Wynn tells Neela to continue with the plan, even if it means that Neela must sacrifice herself. Bareil arrives at the station to help, and at the same time, Miles and Lieutenant Dax discover a hidden sub-program on the station's computer created by Neela. The program controls a timed delay of force fields running from the promenade to the runabouts. They alert Sisko, who is nearby, just as Bareil and Wynn begin to address a crowd of Bajorans on the promenade. Sisko searches the crowd just in time to see Neela raising her phaser at Bareil. Sisko tackles Neela to the ground and saves Bareil's life. Kira suggests that the assassination attempt was planned by Wynn to secure her position as the new Kai, but Neela insists that she was acting alone. Kira later apologizes to Sisko and agrees with his earlier statement about Wynn's actions. So yeah, there's a whole load of conspiracy and battling and tech problems, and it's a very loaded episode for the last one in the series, which I'm appreciative of. Before we properly start, I just want to say thank you to Wikipedia for the episode summary and some historical background information later in our episode, to Memory Alpha for its extensive detailing of Star Trek names, places, and events, to the Star Trek Minutiae website for having the DS9 shooting scripts, which are incredibly handy and interesting, and to the TrekCore website for screen caps from the episode.
Absolutely. We depend on a lot of places to bring you this kind of podcast. It's based on a lot of other people's contributions, and we're very grateful to all of them. So I was actually going to jump in right at the top and say this is a series finale that is not a cliffhanger. It is wrapped up, and it does not lead into episode 1 of season 2, which was a conscious choice by the showrunners. How did you feel about that? Because I thought it was quite well executed. But
I really like it. I feel that it's a self-contained story. By the end, no one is about to die. No one's position is uncertain. We know that the story is ended, but it's still set up Wynn as a very formidable enemy of the station. So it sets up a really good villain for the next series without leaving us with that. Oh, but I need to see the next episode because what the heck's good? I felt that it wrapped it up nicely, and the final speech by Sisko to Kira, the conversation that they have, is a nice one. It kind of brings them from where they've been to where they are now. Sorry, it's Kira who gives a little speech about where Bajor has come over the last year.
Yes.
And Sisko responds kindly, and I really like it. I like the tone of this episode. I think it lacks a lot of the character work that I really enjoy in Deep Space Nine. There isn't much time for just pauses and character development. There isn't a lot of humor. There's no hanging out in Quark's bar, exchanging witticisms. It's just constant, almost constant action.
It has a very rapid pace, doesn't it? Things happen very swiftly.
It does, but like every other episode I think that we've had, it has a relatively complex plot, which it nonetheless delivers so clearly in the short space of time that it's got, and without having to deliver loads of exposition by the characters just explaining and re-explaining things. I think it does a really nice job of telling a story well in the time that they have.
That brings up an interesting point, which ties into my concern, which is obviously Deep Space Nine was looking to find its feet in the shadow of the Star Trek: The Next Generation, which, as we've discussed previously, is episodic. You can jump into an episode of TNG and you don't really need the context of other episodes. Conversely, I feel this episode is very dependent on you understanding how Bajoran culture is set up. I mean, it's set up a little bit by the lesson and the arrival of Wynn, and you get the feeling, okay, that's how their society operates. But it comes very swiftly, and it expects the viewer to have some prior knowledge of Bajoran history. So I thought it was a gamble because Deep Space Nine was trying something new, which was arcing storytelling, had to get out of the shadow of the Next Generation, and it did not leave, because it wasn't a cliffhanger, it did not leave a hook bringing people back for Series 2. So
that's a very good point. I feel that it does a really good economic job of explaining the story. As you say, there's Keiko at the beginning explaining what the wormhole is to us, and when Wynn arrives, what the wormhole means to Bajorans. And I think from that and from various other bits of it, we get the context of the Bajorans live on the planet below. We're on the station up here. The Federation is a newly arrived presence here. Is working with. I think it is explained, but it's explained well through the dialogue. So I would anticipate that someone could arrive at it as a complete newbie and could pick up what was happening in it. But yeah, you're right. It lacks that hook of, we've got to keep watching next time because we've no idea whether X person survives or not. No, everyone's safe. Everyone's fine at the end of the episode. There's just what's Wynn going to do next.
Exactly. So there is, you're actually right. There is that hook, isn't there? Then you really want to see how they're going to beat this villain, who is clearly, just been introduced and will absolutely murder another monk from her homeworld. And you're like, this person's playing for keeps. Those are big stakes.
She's so loathable.
She is loathable, absolutely. And good evening not only to David, but also to Sarah, a couple of our friends we know in the real world, not here on the holodeck. So thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have everyone here. Right, what we normally do then is run through scene by scene, pick up the bits we like. So, Kat, I don't know if you want to kick us off with that first scene on the promenade.
Certainly, I will just apologise though, as Tim has kind of alluded to. I've seen lots of memes. In loads of them, she's referred to as Kai Wynn. So unfortunately,
Yeah,
I didn't
okay.
have that much of a spoiler. I assume that at some point she takes on the position. And I've been very careful in my notes not to refer to her as Kai Wynn, but I almost certainly will do at some point. So I apologise for spoilering myself throughout.
It's a 30-year-old show. I mean, it's impossible. The memes are everywhere.
And it's just
So
too good
close.
not to talk about it, importantly.
They really are. Yep, no problems. But thank you for trying, Kat. We do appreciate it.
But yes, I will ask you, Tim, if you would, to load image 1, which is an image of some candied, meaty-looking material on sticks on display in a shop stall.
Yes, gladly.
Which Miles O'Brien and Keiko walk up to the stall, and notably they don't actually pay anything for it. He just picks up a stick
No.
and walks away. So I don't know whether that was just a gratuity stick because he knows the person, or whether they're starting to adopt Federation ways of sharing snacks. But yeah, Miles offers one to her, and Keiko protests that it's too early for something so sweet. And Miles says, "It's a natural sweetness from the sap of the jumjar tree. It's full of vitamin C." Very excited about this sweet. And there's a beauty. You might have to just jump into him because I'm really excited about this opening scene. They start walking through the promenade, which is a really nice extended camera shot where the camera is in front of them, the actors are walking towards the camera, and the camera is moving backwards to capture them as they're in conversation together. And there are so many extras walking around background. I think that because later on in this episode it required large crowd scenes, they made use of that crowd of extras throughout the episode. So every time there's a promenade scene, there's a notably huge number of people there. And I just really like that they made use of the extras throughout. It makes it feel like a very busy, bustling place.
Which is something they've been trying to achieve, and I think it's something that sci-fi as a whole, and Star Trek in particular, has had that problem of how do we represent a whole planet with a room with 4 people in it? I mean, it's difficult. It is difficult, and finally, they managed to squeeze enough money out of Paramount to get like 20 or 30 people on that lovely big set. So
many of them are aliens. They're Bajorans or they're a different race. So many of them are heavily made up. All of them are in full costume. Yeah, it's lovely to see, and it must have been so damn expensive. I'm really grateful that they managed to do it. But as they walk along, Colm Meaney is holding, you've seen the Jumja sticks, he sticks it in his mouth and he licks it, and he really sells that it's delicious and that he's enjoying it, but he doesn't take any bites out of it. And I've got no idea whether that's because it's a prop, it's made of resin, it tastes terrible, and he's just going, really willingly with this horrible piece of plastic, which he then has to put back and do again for the next shot. Or whether it is nice food and he's deliberately not taking a chunk out of it so that they can reuse it in the next take, because if he takes a bite out of it, they're going to have to keep producing more of that. But either way, I really appreciate his dedication.
It is, again, a testament to Colm Meaney, who we love. He's a great actor, and he portrays a pretty unique role, I think, in Star Trek of an everyman lower decker, So I don't know is the answer, and that's good. That's how you should be. You should be like, I don't really know what's going on here.
This seems to be my subplot within all of my subquest within Star Trek. I spotted a shot of Q eating a whole bok choy in the background of the Tapestry episode. I've never seen anyone else mention it, and when I posted it in the Star Trek ship posting group, everyone was like, "What? When did this happen?"
And that's been out there like 35 years, and it is. I'm not gonna lie. It is explicit. The man has a whole bok choy in his
this
mouth.
long, and he just shoves the entire thing into his mouth and bites it off and chews it and swallows it. I'm like, oh. And my partner very kindly sent off for a cameo of John Delancey and asked him about it, and he doesn't bloody remember. How do you have a career where you shove an entire bok choy in your mouth on camera and you just forget about it afterwards? But yes, I'm now obsessed with finding out whether Colm Meaney actually ate that thing, whether it was edible or not, or whether he was just licking this bit of resin, acting incredibly well. You see, we're now about a minute into the episode. Yep. This is why it took me 3 hours to get through the first 6 minutes. Note taking.
This is the problem, isn't it? We must be more disciplined. We must find our focus. But there is just so much joy from.
Interesting. Yes. Anyway, it's an important scene about the Jumja sticks. So Keiko asks how he became an expert on Jumja sticks, and he says, "Neela told me." And Neela's presence and role in this episode marks such a commitment on the part of the writers to having a through-running thread in the series, because she appeared for the first time. I think I get to this in a little bit, so I'll put it off there. And Keiko says, is she working out any better than the last one?
Yes, very good point, that.
And that's partly a sly reference because the previous apprentice, called
Nara.
Nara, was meant to be the apprentice throughout. She was meant to last up to this episode and be the one who attempts to assassinate Belial. But the producers felt that, I assume they felt that she had too kind a face. For whatever reason, they said that she just didn't fit the role of an assassin.
Okay.
So after one episode, they moved the actress who played Anara and they replaced her with the actress who plays Neela, who is called Robin Christopher. So Neela has been in it for 2 episodes now. She was quite well established in the previous episode. There were lots of shots of her fixing things, talking with O'Brien, fixing technical issues. She's here again at the very after the credits of this episode. And I'm just really impressed that we've got a named ensign. She's got an important role to play in this episode, and TNG would just have had a random ensign that everyone on the bridge crew suddenly knows the name of. We've known them for weeks. No, they've set it up. We have known her for weeks, God damn it, because they care.
It's that embryonic arcing attempt. They're trying to introduce static elements that you will pick up on episode and then suddenly pull them away or do something different with them, and it invests you more in the show. It's great. It's in its embryonic stage, but it is there. This concept of more object permanence in Star Trek, as opposed to let's just beam a storyline on board this week and see what the hell happens, which is fine. But there is as I hope you and other people watching for the first time discovered, there is so much merit in these really long storylines that pay off wonderfully.
It's so satisfying, I think, as a fan, to have been invested in something for a long time and to notice something late on that was referred to early. Unfortunately, Babylon 5 is the example par excellence of that.
We've never...
But seriously, Babylon 5, there are quotes made at the end of season 4 that refer to things in the very first episode, which if you were watching as a viewer at the time, unless you'd bought them on VHS, you wouldn't have seen that for years. It was screened years earlier. But they saw that commitment to making it long form, and that's what Star Trek is doing here. It's relying on the fans watching week on week, picking up those cues that will be returning later. And it's a risk, but it's such a good investment because it gives it so much rewatch value. But yes, right. O'Brien starts to protest because Keiko is teasing him about the new ensign. She says, "Just keeping you on your toes, O'Brien," which I feel really ambivalent about. The immediate assumption that a young woman who's working with O'Brien will, of course, be a threat to their marriage. I love that Keiko dismisses that idea.
Yes.
She plays with it and then says, "Well, no, obviously not." But the fact that it's in there, it's 90s television.
There we go.
I think it's a mainstay, the idea that you got the men's, you got the women's, and the men's don't socialise with the women's because otherwise the closer women's get upset. And it's really frustrating. But they don't play into it. I think it's not his fault that they're making light of it here.
It crops up a little bit later on, but I do feel it's more playing to TV tropes rather than Star Trek tropes, which has always tried to show, no, there wouldn't be any of that nonsense and people are professionals and can work together. That's notwithstanding, I think, the very first pilot when the original Christopher Pike's like, "I'll never get used to the sight of a woman on the bridge." And it's like, oh my God, I get that this is 1963, but for the love of heck. Oh, sorry, 66.
They looked into the future and saw sexists in charge.
Women on the bridge. Blah, 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 blah.
Really weird now, isn't it? Because the other Star Treks do feel, even where they make a few, they're clumsy sometimes in ways that I think they might be less so now. But yeah, the original series is just difficult for many of us to watch, I think.
Unfortunately. Anywho.
But anyway, yes, Keiko walks away smirking and saying, "Be careful who you share your jumja stick with," which I think is a wonderful euphemism for anything you want it to be. Don't go sharing your jumja stick with anyone else but me. We then get a lovely shot of the wormhole opening, which I have on image 2.
There it is. And it's a great shot.
Then, again, lovely camera work. They zoom out to reveal that it's an image of a video on a screen in the classroom, and Keiko walks in saying, "As we discussed in yesterday's lesson," and she walks into frame. And then she describes the wormhole being discovered by Cisco and Dax, and the image changes to a diagram of the wormhole.
Which is wonderfully detailed as well, as so many of the infographics in Star Trek are. You can see that it's actually written, and it makes sense. It's not lorem ipsum. It's actually about the
It's
wormhole.
about the wormhole in the Majoran star system. Oh, it's beautiful, and it's also it's such a nice creative directive choice to start with a shot of the wormhole that just looks as if we're in space looking at the wormhole, and
Yes.
then pan back to show that we're in the classroom. I think many shows would just have had an establishing shot of the classroom, so we all know where we are. They don't. They do it better because they're Deep Space Nine. So Keiko walks towards the students while asking a question about what makes the wormhole so unusual, to which Jake Sisko responds that it is stable. And in the same shot, as Keiko is replying to Jake, the double doors at the back of the room slide open and Vedek Wynn enters.
Dun, dun,
And I
dun.
think, yeah, we have an image of Vedek Wynn
Let me cut to that
a few
now.
months later.
Yes. And
But
it just, that picture screams, won't somebody think of the children, the space children? Think of the children.
she's a horrible baby kissing kind of religious leader. She
Yeah.
just walks straight in and immediately hands on the shoulder of the nearest child.
Chat is currently really already booing and hissing like this is a third-rate pantomime.
Get out of
Thank
here
you,
with your
chat.
Sydney opera hat.
Yeah, the hat is something else. It's a work of art.
It's wonderful. I love it. But yeah, I've said in my notes I won't eat up a lot of time with this, but the classroom set is really lovely. On
It
the
is.
wider shots of it, they've got so many desks, each of them with a little lit up display. They've got genuinely a lot of children sitting in the room. They haven't done the shoot four children in a corner and pretend the whole room is full. Again, they've got a really full set of people here, and it was a commitment to have that many children on set because there are different
Yes.
rules around how you employ children and how many hours they can work for. So I love the commitment. Vedek Wynn smiles and very graciously says, "Please continue." And Keiko explains why the stable wormhole is important, that they can know that neither end will shift locations. She asks why it is stable. And I love that she gets really excited when she gives the answer. She says, because it was artificially constructed. Commander Sisko encountered the entities who made the wormhole when he went. She's doing a really good teacher bit. She's telling the child, and she's conveying her enthusiasm. And Wynn interrupts her with, "Excuse me, by the entities, do you not mean the prophets?" And Keiko does a great job. She yes ands Wynn and says, yes, on Bajor, the entities are worshipped as prophets. Our studies of the wormhole have shown that it was formed by unique particles we call verterons, which are apparently self-sustaining in nature. This begins to explain how a ship at impulse can safely pass through. And I just love that detail that they've written her some proper science spiel. You can't move through it at warp because that would presumably warp the space within the wormhole, which might disrupt it, cause it to collapse. You can only travel through at impulse. And this is children's story time. This is in a classroom to young children, and she's describing it. My love for this scene is just so strong.
It is wonderful. And you know what? It's Starfleet. It's Star Trek. People should be getting mad science. I think the first opportunity they get, the moment you sit down at a desk with a computer, do you know how mad science is? It's mad out there. You know, we travel faster than light, and you know, there's people from other dimensions. It's absolutely right. One thing I did bump on, which I don't think's ever been, it's never been, I think, specifically said, but the idea that the wormhole aliens, the prophets, created the wormhole. So the wormhole was made. It's not naturally occurring, and they just emerged there, or they lived there. They moved into there. They made the wormhole. I just don't think that's actually ever come up before. That the implication is that the wormhole aliens turned up, made the wormhole, and now they live there, and we go through it. It's just interesting because I always thought that the wormhole was naturally occurring and they moved in kind of like hermit crabs or something. I don't know what other people's kind of opinion is of that.
It's a very good point because, I hadn't picked up on that before because the wormhole, I think, only became apparent or came into existence or arrived, I think, after Deep Space Nine was built. The wormhole appeared and they had to move Deep Space Nine away from it so as not to risk damaging it or the station. But yeah, I hadn't thought about the relationship between the prophets that live in the aliens that live in the wormhole and the wormhole itself. I think I'd kind of assumed that they had been in the wormhole for some time, just because they don't give an impression to Sisko that they've just arrived. He's the one who's just arrived with them. But yeah, I think you're right. This is the first time they've given a proper history of they built the wormhole. It is their house.
I guess absolutely so, and they just have to have like a window at either side open so the humans can kind of sail through over the kitchen table or something.
It's rather generous of them when you think about it. I wouldn't open up for an interspace highway in my living room.
Thank you, generous prophets or wormhole aliens. As you see fit. But yes, this is it, and this is it. Now we're getting to the meat of it. So, I cut you off just as the crucial thing happens. Ships travel safely through the wormhole, and then Kai Wynn.
Yeah, Vedic Wynn interrupts again. Ships are safely guided through the passage by the hands of the prophets. And she's smiling widely as she says it. I think it's at this point, sorry, she grabs the lad who's sitting in front of her. And Keiko is less smiley when she says, in a manner of speaking. Wynn is still smiling, not apparently in your manner of speaking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Keiko then very diplomatically asks if they can discuss it after class, and Wynn's having none of it. She's just, do you believe the celestial temple of the prophets exists within the passage? And Keiko, through great teeth, I respect that the Bajoran people believe that it does, but that's not what you teach.
Yes.
And at this point, Keiko says outright, no, I don't teach Bajoran spiritual beliefs. That's your job. She
I
says,
love that line.
Yeah. And she says, mine is to open the children's minds to history, to literature, to mathematics, to science. And Wynn responds with a very fundamentalist, I think. You are opening the children's minds to blasphemy, and I cannot permit it to continue. Yeah, I think it's very emotive stuff. I think that for me as an adult now, I'll get into the context later in this episode at the end in our prime directive section. I've got a few bits of history to throw in there, helped out by the indoor cat who gave us some ideas. But yeah, for me, this really reminds me of the 2000s argument between conservative religious Christians in the US and secular schooling, and the argument that they wanted to pull their children from school because they were being taught science that they do not believe in. So I think this episode was a little ahead of the curve in bringing that to a wider audience. And Keiko, I think the scene ends with Keiko looking at Vedic Wynn in a very troubled way, and then we fade to black. And I've done a little rant here. I'm going to stop ranting fairly soon. I think I wrote this rant, then calmed down a bit and did the rest of the episode. But I'm going to give you my rant. I really admire the way that Louise Fletcher plays Vedic Wynn. At the moment, she's smiling a lot. She's putting forth a lot of effort to appear warm and loving, and she absolutely doesn't give an inch. Her expression at this point in the conversation is one of sorrow rather than of anger when Keiko won't concede to her demands. And there's a bit of me, and I don't know how much it's about my being a non-binary person, having an interest particularly in how gender is performed and used and displayed in fiction. But I think that Wynn, with her relatively high-pitched voice, she always has a very gentle tone. She has strong expressions of, she has a warm smile almost constantly, even if it's a hypocritical one. And she's a very asexual, feminine-coded villain, which I think is really rare to see. I think mostly in my experience of watching film and television, female villains tend to be highly sexualized. I think of Ardra in TNG, who was effectively, she was a devil on a planet, and she was very highly sexed. There have been non-sexualized villains in Star Trek. There was Sella, who was Tasha Yar's Romulan daughter, who pretty much acts in a very similar way to Romulan males. Her sex does not distinguish her from them in any strong ways. But I think it's really rare to have a villain who so strongly emphasizes what we consider to be, well, are widely considered to be stereotypical feminine qualities of care, of expressing caring and warmth, even though she does not carry that through later in the episode, without having a sexually seductive aspect. I think it's very unusual, and in some ways it's not a like-for-like comparison, but it is very similar to Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, someone who espouses the idea that, no, I'm caring for these people. I want them to be well, while acting against their interests and while imposing her views upon them. I think I haven't quite grasped in myself what it is that makes Vedic Wynn so compelling and so... She's amazing and irritating to watch. I hate her and I love watching her. And I can't quite situate in myself where the discomfort in me comes from. There's something about her that's very unusual, I think, and I can't quite put my finger on it yet.
Yeah, I like the sound of that, and that is a great first impression of Wynn. It's I think that's exactly how she was intended to land. And it does evoke, I think, for a lot of viewers, that very familiar thought of an older woman within a very religious society, definitely that kind of quiet authority, bordering on, malevolent control and manipulation. It's very familiar. I'd never thought of it in terms of villain coding that you described, but I can absolutely see what you mean now. And just a reminder to chat not to spoil anything coming up in the future as well. Chat is very active and it's lovely to see you all, but just a reminder, obviously, please let's try and keep as much off the radar as we can for Cat. One interesting comment I noticed from Rip Zuzu, welcome to the chat, who said, Kaiwan would have been great for Beidra under the occupation, but like Churchill was not a politician for a newly liberated nation. The first thing is interesting because that immediately speaks to Wynne being a politician, which this episode very quickly does. We've met members of Bajoran spiritual order before, and they've, we know how important religion is to Bajoran society, but this is a new angle, a political angle, and you suddenly see that is what Wynne is doing. She's using her religious authority to now extend and have political power, and as the episode expands, we realise she's gunning for the ultimate political power, and that is not even hedged about. The Kai is a political master force on Beidra. So it's interesting to look at it in these terms of, would she have been a good opponent to the Cardassians? Yes, probably.
Yeah, and the thing is, the Cardassians only left a year ago. She must have been alive, was presumably already within the Order. I don't think we're given any picture in this episode. I assume that we might in the future of exactly what Wynne was doing during the occupation. Yeah. I don't have a sense of how many followers she had, whether she was actively opposing the Cardassians, whether she was just quietly sitting in a nunnery somewhere. I'd be interested to find out if future episodes will expand on her backstory a bit, because Kira, I think, says that she said late in the episode that she respected Wynne, but she doesn't say anything about where she first encountered her or what Wynne's role was during the occupation. So, I'm interested now in finding out what that was.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, definitely. But again, that's what is happening. That it's immediately being positioned as this is a political struggle. And that immediately undercuts all of it. This expression of concern for the children, of fighting against blasphemy, all of it falls completely hollow because it's a political struggle.
Yeah, and I think as the episode goes on, it becomes more clear that she's chosen the school as an issue, a live issue that people will immediately feel emotive about. It isn't necessarily the thing she's most concerned about on the station. It's the thing that she knows will grab attention quickest. It's very cynical.
Yes, indeed. Which unfortunately is kind of like the shorthand of the show. It can be very cynical about Star Trek, but we are getting bogged down. So
yes, we now have the opening credits. Imagine you've swirled around the station a bunch of times. And then the next shot, we've got an image of Neela working on a panel. It's shot from inside the damn wall. We're inside the wall, looking out through the panel, which Neela is working on. It's bloody incredible. I love it.
Bring that up. There it is. There's that shot. And it's fantastic. It is great, yeah. And you can see the office behind them as well. So it is clearly from behind the set. What a bizarre place to film from.
Absolutely, they built a space so that the camera can. I just love how much, and you've said it many times, Tim, how much the Deep Space Nine set is a physical place. It does look like a series of connected rooms bound by corridors and off the promenade. I love this. Miles is in focus in the background. It's a deep shot. She's got a tool in there. She's actually working on something. It's beautiful.
It's great. And then when she finishes working, O'Brien turns around and the screens behind him flick on and start showing CCTV footage from around the station. It works. It actually works. It's not just a laminated piece of plastic with a light behind it. It's an actual real monitor, which must have been horrible to try and film. That's incredible.
Actually, yes. Yeah, because the flicker rate is usually prohibitive when oh my goodness. They're just so good. They just the way that everything in Deep Space Nine is so integrated. They've thought about where the camera's going to be shooting, the work that's being done, how the work that's being done is going to be incorporated into the set. This piece of work being done will come back towards the end of the episode. It's plot critical.
Yes, that's a very good point. It is Chekhov's panel, and I don't mean the navigator of the Enterprise.
It's the reinitialization of Chekhov's isolinear coprocessor, which Yeah, Miles O'Brien asks whether if she's remembered to reinitialize the isolinear coprocessor. And I've put in the script, I feel so sorry for Colmini at these moments. I can barely say when it's written down in front of me. But that phrase will recur in this episode, unfortunately.
And yeah, it is a testament to you, Kat, and your dedication that you always carefully note down the Treknobabble, and you are able to restate it for us, the viewers, every time. So thank you so much for your commitment. It's much appreciated.
Oh, I just love it so much. I think if the actors have had to damn well memorize it, I can bumblingly say it off the script. But yes, Neela replies, I did it exactly like you showed me. And she asks if she should test it. O'Brien says that he'll do it. He says, you know, as old folks, we like to feel useful. So yeah, he then checks the function of the 2 CCTV screens on the other side of the room and confirms that they're working. And he says, you keep this up, I'll be out of a job. And I love how economically it tells a short story between them, that she is a new apprentice. She is clearly young. She's very good at her job. The slightly older guy who's been working there for a long time is jokingly, but probably on some level seriously, concerned about the fact that he's getting older, that his expertise is being surpassed by someone who's younger than him. And it's just done so neatly between the two characters without having to, without it being fourth wall breaking. There's no, oh, they're making us see that O'Brien's getting old. It's just an everyday conversation that could take place.
Exactly. It is believable. I've had that where I've been training new members of staff and it's like, oh wow, you picked that up a lot faster than I did when I was shown. Okay, just take me around the back of the barn and just put me out of everyone's misery, you know. That's fine. So it was a lovely, believable scene. And also, I just like this comment in the chat from Bakery Dragon, who says, feels like this subconsciously gives the show immersion, feeling like it's a real breathing space. We're talking about the set again. Never thought about it when I watched it, but thinking about it now seems so good. And it does. That's something Kat and I keep touching on, is that we love how detail orientated the producers and the set designers and the writers and everybody are to make Deep Space Nine seem real, not just a set on which a story of the week takes place, but a real place.
Yeah, and the Bakery Dragon makes a really good point that you don't necessarily notice it until I don't notice it until I'm writing up my notes, until I start poking around. Okay, how did they use the camera here? Why is the set up this way? It feels so natural and it flows so well with the story that they're telling that it isn't intrusive. There are very few moments watching the show when I've gone, hang on, why is that in shot? What are they doing here? Oh, I see, they're trying to be clever. It is intensely clever and it's unnoticed for the most part.
Smooth,
it's high
natural
quality and it's I'm so impressed by this 30-year-old TV show.
This is great. This is exactly the experience we were all hoping you would have. One tiny little thing I wanted to know, and it's such a nerdy little thing. O'Brien is late because he had to deal with one of the fusion reactors. And it's a reminder that, although this is Star Trek, Deep Space Nine does not run on an antimatter warp core because it doesn't have a warp drive. It doesn't need to go anywhere. So it's so niche, but it's just a reminder that there is no, warp core overload risk on Deep Space Nine because they don't have a warp core. They have a fusion
and you can't just
reactor.
eject the warp core if there's a dangerous enemy nearby. There isn't one.
It's huge. Like the entire bottom of the central stack of Deep Space Nine is one massive connection of reactors. So you couldn't do that without breaking the station in half. But yeah, it also reminds you this is not a Federation station. This is not a Federation starship. This is not familiar technology, which is part of a lot of O'Brien's storylines. He's always dealing with this alien technology. So I loved it. Just a little note. Oh, no warp core. So no, warp core overloads.
Oh, that's a really good observation, Tim. I love it. And I do love that the fact that his Cardassian tech gives him it always gives him something to be doing. The computers aren't the nice, sleek ones on board TNG. You can't just ask the computer to do something and assume that it will. You've constantly got to finagle them into doing what you want. But yes, we cut to a view inside the room, and O'Brien tells Neela that you'll need an EJ7 interlock to close the seal she's about to work on. And she says, EJ7? O'Brien says, oh, it's all right, I've got one here. Checks his toolbox. Oh, bloody hell. And his EJ7 has gone missing. Neela says, maybe you left it in ops. And O'Brien laughs and says, no, I don't misplace my tools. There's clearly something suspicious going on. But I also like that Neela's response when he says that an EJ7 interlock is needed. She goes, EJ7? As if she's got no idea what it is, which we later find out that it was her who damn well stole it. It's just so shrewd, and we wouldn't suspect. And as viewers, the episode consistently sets up that she is innocent through actions that she takes, which you can deconstruct after the fact. Anyway, in the next scene, we've got Cisco and Keiko in Cisco's office. Cisco says to Keiko that he's not exactly surprised. Keiko looks somewhat incensed and says, "You knew this was going to happen?" And Cisco says, "Well, a confrontation like this was inevitable. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever find the common ground we need to bring Bajor into the Federation," which is one of the few times when I think the script is not subtle. It's like school teacher comes in and suddenly it's, yes, it's going to be difficult to bring Bajor into the Federation as we've been planning all this time.
Yeah, you are right, and it is a little bit heavy. But I know that when they were writing it, they were trying desperately to knit it back to the first episode and be like, "This is why we're here. This is why we're on this janky ass station on the edge of known space."
As well as you point out to make that clear to new viewers who might not understand the relationship between Bajor and the Federation. Now they do. A line of dialogue and it's done.
Very good point.
Yeah. So Cisco clicks a button on his console and the two doors slide open. He says, "Major, would you join us?" And Kira has heard about what happened at the school. She says that Vedic Wynn has been meeting with some of the Bajoran civilians on the station about it. Cisco asks what Kira knows about Wynn, and Kira says, well, she's from an Orthodox order. She has had some support to become the next Kai, but probably not enough. Keiko asks, the question is, how much support does she have on this station? And Kira tells her that Wynn has her support and thinks that some revisions in the curriculum might be appropriate, as Keiko teaches a lot of Bajoran children. Keiko reiterates, "I'm not going to let a Bajoran spiritual leader dictate what can and can't be taught in my classroom." So Kira suggests maybe they have a two-school system, one school for Bajoran system, one for Bajoran children, and one for the Federation. Cisco says if we start separating Bajoran and Federation interests, which is immediately looking at the bigger picture, thinking about if we start having separate streams in one place, that's going to be reiterated. And Kira says a lot of Bajoran and Federation interests are separate, Commander. This bit of the conversation I really liked. Cisco asks if spiritual teaching can't be taught in addition to what's taught by Keiko. Kira says, but if she's teaching a fundamentally different philosophy, Keiko responds, "I'm not teaching any philosophy. What I'm trying to teach is pure science." And Kira says, some might say pure science taught without spiritual context is a philosophy, Mrs. O'Brien. And Cisco says, "My philosophy is that there's room for all philosophies on this station. Thanks, real helpful, mate. Now, how do you suggest we deal with this?" It leaves the issue unresolved. And yeah, I don't respect Keiko's position here. It feels, I think this comes, from my context, it comes before the atheism wars on the internet. It comes before there was a large bandwagon following Richard Dawkins. I forgot Christopher, whoever the other guy was. So there wasn't as much discussion about atheism. There wasn't as much overt discussion about atheism as being a philosophy in and of itself, which colours a lot of Western thought, a lot of secular thought. The fact that it is a philosophy, it is a viewpoint, is not discussed here, is not recognised. I think that the writers assume that pure science is pure, it is empirical. It cannot have a point of view, it just is what is, while religion is something that belongs to individual cultures. And I think now that would be done differently. I think we would have to acknowledge that Keiko's position is a very heavily cultured one. And it is one that might be shared across different cultures who have scientific endeavours, but it's nonetheless cultural, and her attempt to not have any religion for the Bajoran children, I'll touch on it more later, could be construed as problematic, as taking something from them which they would have had on their home planet.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there was an opportunity for Keiko to be more diplomatic, certainly, and it shouldn't have fallen to Cisco to be like, all philosophies are welcome, which itself is a little bit of a shrug of, everything's welcome. I'm like, well, no, obviously it's not. You need to carefully, manage, what is discussed and debated. But I think a lot of that comes from the unconscious bias of Star Trek writers, which is always, well, science, this wonderful, magical, amoral. I don't mean what's the true neutral. Science is just a tool that makes Star Trek work. It's great, science is akin to magic. It progresses the story. It in itself has no inherent morality. The morality comes from the people. And that's fine. You're telling a story, so I can understand that it would be pinned on the people. But I do think it's a bit too easy to shrug that responsibility off then and say, it ties back to exactly to what you said, that science is without emotion or agenda or anything, and therefore it's pure and therefore good. Which we all know is really lazy and reductive and is not true.
And every scientific paper is written with some culture, some bias brought to it. There is no such thing as pure science arisen from the universe without human interaction. Dennis Bloodmark makes another really good point, that in Deep Space Nine's universe, we know that the Bajoran spirituality has a real basis.
Yes.
We know that the prophets exist, and we know that the orbs exist and impact the universe around them.
It all comes down to Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic, and any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from, if you want, religion. Miracles are just, transdimensional powers. So 100%, this is a really complex, thorny, knotty issue, and I guess the writers of a 45-minute TV episode of the 90s didn't really want to go wading too deeply in this, and they will get past that and there will be better stories. But yeah, I think here they're trying to get us towards the action as quickly as possible and going, science good, religious fundamentalism bad. You can fill in the bits in the middle, right?
And I think they're not necessarily doing a bad job. They're doing it from where they are situated. I think that 10, 20 years later, they would have had to acknowledge that that atheist point of view had been in the public sphere and had been deconstructed more within the public sphere, and they would have been able to address it in shorthand for the audience. At this point, they would have been opening a can of worms that many people did not realise existed by doing that. So I can appreciate why it didn't happen here.
100%. I think they went as far as they could with the very many obstacles to telling this kind of complex storyline in 1993.
Absolutely. So we'll move on. We come to the promenade, an up-level shot from the floor below. So we're on the floor, looking up into the mezzanine level, and there are many people walking the hallway. Sisko walks away from the camera through a doorway, which is very clearly in the Bajoran style. It's our 6th image, if you would kindly bring that up, Tim.
There we go. What a great shot. That looks fantastic.
For those who are listening along, because we're hoping to bring this podcast to audio only at some point, it's a golden doorway shaped pretty much like a circle. It's got a ring around it, which has a repeated motif, which looks exactly like the Bajoran comm badge that Kira and Odo wear. So it marks it out immediately as being a Bajoran structure on board the station. Sisko enters the Bajoran chapel, a space with no fewer than 4 chandeliers in it. It's blooming elaborate, this space. The room's oval-shaped and the decor features several other ovals. I think that the fact that the comm badge is oval points to that being a very important shape in Bajoran culture. Vedek Wynn is at the far end of the room. She's standing facing away from Sisko in front of an ornate incense holder. And without turning around, she says, "I can't tell you how much I've looked forward to this moment." She finally turns to face him and says, "I'm honoured to meet the emissary of the prophets." And Sisko says, "Well, if you'd let me know." I keep saying "well" at the start of their statements. I'm going to stop doing that. They're not all saying "well." That's my habit, not the characters in Deep Space Nine.
I don't think anybody picks up, Kat. Give yourself a break.
I've picked it up. Sisko says, "If you'd let me know you were coming, Vedek Wynn, I would have greeted you sooner." And Wynn says, "I did not wish to bother you with my insignificant visit." And I've put in my notes that I'm starting to gather that part of Vedek Wynn's evil is that she's striving, without appearing to be effortful, to appear submissive and humble, but her actions don't match this. She barged into Keiko's classroom. She came aboard the station in secret, rather than letting anyone prepare for her coming. She's feigning humility, but already she's showing some cunning. She's seeking to do things without the permission of the people who are affected.
And also, I think later on they also say she's the leader of a rather minor order, and so her position in the hierarchy of the Vedic Assembly, the main church of Beto, is unclear. So it's also like, I mean, what is her position? Does she deserve certain recognition? I don't know, but the whole thing is, I feel like I'm being manipulated into trying to reassure her, which is, of course, exactly what she wants.
Yes, it's clever. She's very cleverly written. Sisko says, "I'd hardly call it insignificant," referring to her visit. And when Vedek Wynn calls him emissary again, he replies, "I wish you wouldn't call me that. I'm Commander Sisko, or Benjamin, if you like." Sisko is being very sincere, open, polite, speaking from a personal point of view, whereas Wynn is already speaking. She speaks in grand terms, in terms of the prophet's existence, in terms of universal definites. She doesn't say things like, "Well, I believe that this is the right thing to do. This is what I think." So I think that little, the use of his pronouns in language, saying "I," "me," marks Sisko as being more sincere than her very quickly, although we already know that of him.
We do. And I think it's also a way for Wynn to reassure herself that she deserves it. She is a vessel of the prophets. Of course I am, but carrying out their will, their vision. So it's both, I think, to reassure her own obvious insecurity and to maximize her own political power. So it's a very cunning little strategy, and it's also bloody annoying. But anyway.
Yes. The next thing I've put in my notes is that she isn't shaken, frustrated, or upset when she's making her demand. She states her position as if it was certain fact. She knows that she is right.
Exactly what David just said in the chat. They completely agree with you. So this is great. We're all on the same page. Glad to see it.
I promise I didn't just steal your view.
But we won't tell you when we do steal your opinion, so stay on your toes.
Give us your insight and we will nick it. Vedek says, but you are the emissary. Don't you know the cherished place you have earned in Bajoran's spiritual life? And Sisko says, I'm not sure I'm comfortable in that role.
I think that's intentional. She is trying to put him on edge, I think.
Yeah, and he again is evincing genuine humility. He doesn't want to play up the importance of his role within the religion. He's not willing to try and do that. And Wynne responds, the course the prophets choose for us may not always be comfortable, but we must follow it, while smiling very warmly. Again, she's imposing her belief, saying how it is. We must follow it. It might not always be comfortable. She's aiming to sound inclusive with the use of we, but nonetheless she's imposing a spiritual position on Sisko. She then, at least she does ask, may I, before taking hold of his left ear with her right hand. And they stand in silence this way for a few seconds before she smiles and says, still the disbeliever. And she says, I once asked Cleopatra why a disbeliever was destined to seek the prophets, and she told me that one must never look into the eyes of one's own gods. I disagreed, and she keeps smiling. She turns away from Sisko, walks a little way and turns back. I told her I would do anything to look into their eyes. She suggested that I sit in darkness for a day, and quite properly so. She cannot be replaced, and I miss her deeply. And it's really nice to have a reminder of the much more likeable, more personable Cleopatra, who was more humble. She didn't talk about the importance of her role in relation to the prophets. She didn't invoke the prophets every few minutes to get what she wanted. And it's interesting that Wynne has both brought her up and said, oh yes, I liked her very, very much. She's very much missed. We can only assume that Opaka did not like Wynne, or would not like Wynne if she ever interacted with her among the 112 FedEx sat below her.
Exactly. I think it's interesting. I don't think Opaka ever mentioned, a successor, which is interesting, actually. She must have known that she obviously had to stay on the moon where the episode Battle Lines took place. I wonder if she ever gave any kind of guidance to Kira and Sisko about what should happen.
It's a very good point, because Kira and Sisko were there with her. They both spoke with her. She could have passed something to Kira as a fellow Bajoran and someone who's protecting Bajoran interests.
I'm thinking, who should inherit after me? But possibly she was thinking, I trust in the wisdom of the Vedic Assembly to choose the next best successor, rather than for me to inflict my personal choice. And unfortunately, that left the Assembly wide open to the machinations of some.
I think that's a very good way of rationalising it, that she would trust her fellow FedEx, the FedEx who sat in her assembly, to make the right choice. Unfortunately,
this is a large public body has opportunity to make a decision. Will they make the right decision?
We're in 2024. We know how that goes.
Okay.
But yes, Vedek is now unsmiling as she says, the prophets have spoken to me through the orb's emissary. I understand my duty to defend the Bajoran faith. The teacher has dishonored the celestial temple. If she does not recant, I cannot be responsible for the consequences. And in my notes, I put she will be entirely fucking responsible for the consequences. Hence, she can predict them. She knows what's going to happen.
Exactly. And after all of that soapy, oh, I miss people dearly. Oh, I am but a vessel of the prophets. It's an out and out threat.
Yeah.
That is absolutely how it should be read. She is threatening Sisko, saying, you rein her in and let our culture take primacy, or there'll be trouble and I'll pin it on you. It's awful, and it's such jarring contrast. And in that moment, you get, I think, the full measure of Wynne.
Yes, definitely. She's showing her true colours at that moment. And frustratingly, it fades to black and we go to the next scene rather than getting Sisko's response, which I think would have been far more diplomatic than she deserved.
Yeah, absolutely would.
But yes, we fade up on Ops, where O'Brien and Neela are walking in. O'Brien says that he's still looking for his EJ7 interlock, and that with it, someone could access every critical system on the station. Dax tells O'Brien that as Ensign Akito didn't report for duty this morning. He's not on the station and he didn't log out. I don't think we've ever set eyes on Ensign Akito. I think he exists solely for this episode. O'Brien asks the computer to show the location of any independent tritanium sources, the implication being that will show where his tools are. It identifies a tool locker, which O'Brien's already searched through, and there is something in a power conduit on level 12, section 8. O'Brien tells the computer to shut down the conduit and reroute the plasma flow. O'Brien and Neela arrive in the conduit where there is a patch of visceral-looking goo on the floor. Apparently, it's a melted tritanium composite, the missing interlock tool. Neela says that it must have been melted by the conduit's plasma flow, and O'Brien's tricorder beeps. He says that he's picking up traces of organic material. O'Brien's next line is, "Whatever it was, it's been pretty well cooked." Which, given that someone is missing, and that we've just found a tool in a plasma conduit, it's not the most subtle or tactful.
It's not. O'Brien works in Starfleet, has worked on the Enterprise for years. Surely by now he'd have got a radar, like, somebody's gone missing and now I found some weird stuff in a conduit.
And it's got remains of somebody.
I mean, it all seems like a very familiar setup. I'm just saying, these, you know when people are not genre savvy, O'Brien in this moment is not genre savvy, despite the fact that he works in space.
Yeah, for my part, I got shades of from the Star Trek motion picture. There's a horrific transporter accident, which is very minimal in what they show.
Yeah,
but there's a horrific line. Kirk tells them to send back the people because they're not materializing properly. They've started to fall apart within the beam, and when they disappear again, he says, "Did they arrive? Are they with you?" And the response that he gets from Starfleet Command is, "What we got back didn't live long, unfortunately." It's chilly.
It's absolutely horrendous.
It's done with no blood on screen, absolutely nothing viscerally shown, just some humanoid shapes which gradually fall apart within the picture.
And
But yeah, O'Brien saying he's picked up traces of organic material, whatever it was pretty well cooked. It just reminded me of that visceral horror.
I mean, that happened hundreds of years ago in his past, and ever since then, people have constantly been, absolutely seared by the horrible chemicals they work with on a regular basis.
And he's like, "Oh, there's organic material here. Oh, it's been roasted."
Do you not know where you work? And what happens to people where you work on a regular fucking basis? No, none of that. Astonishing. But yes, shout out
in
to that
scene. In the chat,
scene.
Susie says, "Is it 4 p.m. Friday? Does O'Brien just want to clock off?"
He's like, if I put in a report that I found desiccated remains, I'm going to have to stay back for hours. And I don't know if you get overtime in Starfleet. I don't know if it works like that. So,
he decides that poor Bashir can deal with it. So he takes a sample for Bashir.
I love chat this evening. You're so cynical. I love it. This is exactly the kind of energy I'm looking for. Just that horrible scene in TMP, though. I think there was also a sound. There was a very disquieting sound of a scream and the transporter effect, and it's very, God, that moment stayed with me.
Absolutely. I hadn't expected it because I think the only other, sorry, I'm just going off on a tangent now. The only other moment of proper body horror that I remember seeing in Star Trek is the episode of The Next Generation where a crew member is phased into a floor
deck, yes,
during an accident. And all you see is the upper half of a woman, yes, with her arms in peculiar positions. There's just a tiny bit of blood from her ear and her mouth.
Yeah.
But it horrifies everyone who watches it because it isn't what we expect from Star Trek. And the implication of someone being merged with the floor. When Star Trek does body horror, it does it very minimally and very, very well. And I don't think that's really what they were going for here. I think they just genuinely wanted organic material. It's been blasted by the plasma in the conduit. But yeah, that line from O'Brien's kind of unforgivable. It's just too it's too light-hearted for the fact that Ensign Akito has very obviously died.
But yes.
Anyway, the next scene, we get an exterior of Deep Space Nine, and then we cut to O'Brien talking to Keiko in a turbo lift. Oh God, I rant so often in this episode. I'm going to give a really prolonged description of this shot because I was so impressed by it. They're talking in the turbo lift, and it transpires that Ensign Aquino made a log entry the night that he disappeared. He was going to fix the plasma flow irregularity in the conduit. Bashir's test has shown that the remains were human, and they're now awaiting a DNA test to confirm that it was Aquino. The two of them then walk out of the turbo lift towards the Jumja stall. And it's pulled off without fanfare at all, as the Bakery Dragon noted earlier. I didn't notice it until I was really watching for it. The two people are standing in a turbo lift. with lights moving upwards to show that they are traveling within the turbo lift. We know that the turbo lift has stopped when they are more brightly lit. The two actors have brighter lights on them to show that the doors have opened, and they walk forward. The bloody camera is situated inside the Jumjostick stall.
Yes. Let me jump to that scene next.
Yeah,
There
image 7, I've got a close-up of the two of them in the turbo lift, and then image 8.
Yes.
You can see the camera hasn't moved between the two shots.
That's absolutely right.
The camera has just zoomed out and panned back a very little bit, which means that while the two were in the turbo lift, there were no actors standing between the Jumjo stall and the lift.
That's true.
It means that that camera had a clear line of sight to the two of them.
Yep.
And picked them up perfectly. They're in focus throughout this complex shot. And that when the lights came up, which is the cue that the doors have opened, that was the cue for everyone else on set to start walking as if they'd always been walking across the shot, because those two have only just arrived. When in actual fact, everyone has been standing stock still so as not to walk into shot, waiting for the lights to come up so that they can start walking, so that those two characters can walk between them towards the camera, which has always been inside the Jumjostick stand. And I can only imagine that Livingston was auditioning for Hollywood or something, because you don't need to have a shot like that. You could have had one shot from inside the turbo lift and then a second shot of them leaving and walking towards the stall. But no, they did it all in one shot and had every person on set very precisely standing in place and then moving on cue and being silent while those two actors are standing having their voices recorded in a very busy room.
Yep. Yep.
It's so unnecessary and it's so labor intensive, and I absolutely love that they did it for no good reason.
Except, more than 30 years later, a couple of nerds on a podcast could go, that's great cinematography. That's outstanding, because you wouldn't have noticed it at the time. Again, we're all fans of TNG, where it's always the turbo lift moves, the doors open, new scene. They walk out into a corridor. And
any conversation is normally a 2-camera shot. You've got camera over each person's shoulder, shooting one person speaking, the other person speaking.
Yes.
Not close-in shots of both people, and then moving immediately. There's a bit of me thinking, did they save so much money on the terrible direction of the Vortex episode that they just had loads of money to spend on this last one?
Poor old
Seriously,
Vortex.
they pulled out all the stops for this one. It's wonderful.
Well, I do think series finale as well, they really wanted to deliver a masterclass episode, which in many ways this is. So, I hadn't even clocked that that's what was going on in the camera. So thank you so much for flagging that.
That's just it. It's so beautifully integrated. It's appropriate for what the action is. It's never flashy and showy. It meets what is happening on what should be happening on screen.
100%.
I haven't looked up whether any episodes of this series were nominated for Emmys, and there's a bit of me thinking that would be a reason to make special directorial shots within an episode if you were going for a particular award. So I might look that up later.
That would be something to dig up. We will try and have a little bit of background information for our episodes, and I don't recall it coming up in the Memory Alpha summaries, but that's not to say that it's exhaustive, so we will have to...
And they might not have. They might just have made it for the sheer geekish love of making it.
God, I
anyway,
hope so.
They finally arrive at the damn stall. Yes. Miles asks for one Jumjostick. Keiko wrinkles her nose because she still doesn't want to eat them first thing in the morning. And the Bajoran stand owner says, sorry, we're all out. And there are clearly 5 Jumjosticks there on the stall. The stand owner says, these aren't for sale. And Miles leans over and grabs the guy's shirt and asks how he'd like a Jumjostick up before Keiko goes, Miles?
It's incredible how quickly Miles O'Brien jumped to DEFCON 1.
I think he's a little on edge because of what happened with Vedic Wim in the classroom. He's very protective of Keiko. Someone is making a slight against Keiko here, so he's immediately leaning in, asking what the guy's problem is and threatening him. Odo wanders up, asking, "Is there a problem?"
God, he's always there, isn't he?
He's good. I think he's just omnipresent on the prom. Could Odo do that? Could he actually split himself into multiple small versions of himself so that he could just literally be an eye in various parts of the prom and then just loop himself together wherever there's trouble?
I think for both the plot and the special effects budget purposes, no. He can be a chair or a lamp or a wall.
This episode doesn't have any very expensive CG effects that I've noticed. It doesn't have anything unusual happening with the wormhole. There's a Bajoran shuttle, but I think we may have seen them before. I think they pre-existed this episode. There aren't any Odo transformation scenes, so I think that's where they probably saved the money. They haven't got all of these CG effects going on, so they can spend it on large crowd scenes. But yes, Odo comes up asking if there's a problem. The stand owner says, I don't have to sell anything to them if I don't want to. And Odo asks why he wouldn't want to sell anything to them, but Keiko begs Miles to leave and they go. The stand owner calls after them, seek the profits, to which O'Brien replies, I'll seek you, which doesn't mean a great deal, but it's kind of funny.
I think also Odo also says, seek them yourself. And I'm like, whoa, Odo, that's a little bit partisan from our supposedly very
really
independent...
O'Brien is the one who leaned in and grabbed the guy, but Odo can see that the guy had offended them. Yeah. He had refused them service for no reason that was apparent. So yeah, Odo is immediately very defensive. And I liked his seek them yourself, the kind of hypocritical, you're being unkind. It's the way Bajoran would behave. As I say Bajoran because I don't think there is a specific name for the Bajoran religion. I think it is just Bajoran spiritual practice.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah, it's never come up, and I don't think it ever does. That's a really good point. Like, obviously we have Catholic Church or any name of any religious organisation has its own.
There's so many religions on Earth, but we assume that Bajor has only one religion. The different sects, He comes from an orthodox sect, but again, it's not named. I wonder whether that will be expanded upon later, as it becomes more embedded in the storyline.
Yeah, 100%.
But yes, on a step, let's see. Oh yeah, O'Brien says to Keiko, maybe you're right, maybe we've no business here. I'll put in for a transfer. And Keiko says, no, I can't run away from this now. But I kind of like that O'Brien's instinct, rather than either to fight everybody until it works, or to just tell Keiko to close her school. End the problem here. She started up this school out of personal interest. It isn't something I'm relying on. But he doesn't do anything like that. He doesn't ask her to concede to Vedek when he takes her side absolutely and would rather leave the station than have her have to back down.
Yeah.
Which would be a huge commitment for him. He's been working here for some time. He's really embedded in the crew. I just really like that show of solidarity from O'Brien. I think it's really sweet.
It is.
On a stepped-up area of the promenade, Vedek Wynn is talking to a crowd of Bajorans, and she's surrounded by children. She turns and said, here's Mrs. O'Brien now. Keiko greets her, and Vedek Wynn asks, are you Mr. O'Brien? O'Brien says, that's right. And her hands are on a child's shoulders again. She just can't let go of them. Vedek Wynn says, a pleasure to meet you. I've been hearing wonderful things about your wife from the parents of these children. She apparently is an excellent teacher, which sits in stark contrast with the attitude of the stall holder, who we can only assume as being informed by Wynn and her followers.
I think that's a totally intentional contrast, definitely.
And O'Brien says, yes, she is, and she doesn't deserve what you're doing to her. Vedek Wynn says, I feel your anger toward me, and I forgive you for it, which is the most enraging thing a person can do. There's nothing that sees a person less than saying, I can see how you're feeling, and I forgive you for that. Oh! She's just so calculatedly written to annoy.
It is absolutely the case. And it's her psychological manipulation, it's her power play, it's how she operates. And it is sadly very familiar, I know, to a lot of people who have had encounters with religious fundamentalism and how that plugs into politics, which is a sadly still very relevant and clear problem that we will not dig too deeply into because we don't try and link Star Trek to current world events, because I don't think either of us feel qualified to speak with any authority on them.
Absolutely. At the end of this episode, I will look at some of the events that were happening in the run-up to this episode being aired, just so we've got a bit of an understanding of what was in the media at the time. And I did discover that the writer Robert Hewitt both had a Catholic upbringing, so I can only assume that some of Vedek Wynn is brought from his memory. And yes, I think it is likely to be very, very recognisable for anyone who's had a religious upbringing or education. Vedek Wynn goes on saying, Mrs. O'Brien, if I've misjudged you, I am terribly sorry. Have I? Is there a place in your school for the prophets? Saying that she's sorry, if you agree with me, if you will concede the point and come over to my side, then I'll be sorry for what I've done. It's so insincere. I hate it. And I love how well it's written. She's very, very, very well done. And Keiko just says, no. And rightly or not, I instinctively love that she doesn't cede any ground in front of all of these people. And Wynn says, I admire you for standing by your convictions, even though I disagree with them. At this point, in all caps, I've got, oh, do you now? Virtue signalling to the crowd!
Yeah.
up just watching her. And as I say, I'm someone who did not have a religious upbringing. It isn't triggering anything in me from my childhood. This is purely my response to her as an adult watching someone being a religious hypocrite and treating people so badly. It's really horrible. She goes on to say, please believe me, I want to find a way to allow these children to stay in your school. And she says, let me be the one to make the first concession. She moves the child to one side, but she walks forward and she carries him with her. She keeps her hands on his shoulders and takes him forward with
the
her.
authority. The authority. This is my passport to power. I am thinking of the children, and you just want to.
Terrible. It's that or she's already got assassination on her mind. She's like, bodyguard, tiny child in front of me. But yes, she says, I will no longer request that you teach anything about the Celestial Temple. Just don't teach anything about the wormhole at all.
You might as well not teach about the bloody sky.
Teach the children. Sorry, Tim?
I was just going to say, you might as well not teach about the bloody sky. I mean, it's right there. It's right outside the window. And it's the weirdest thing in the galaxy. How could you not talk about it? It's the most absurd concession. And that's, again, utterly intentional.
And I think the thing that it reminded me of, which I think comes from more from my perspective than from an early 90s one, is the removal of sex education from schools. That trust parents to teach it at home. If they're not taught it in school, so they'll learn it somewhere else. That's fine. No. Oh. And Keiko says next, and when we get to theories of evolution or creation of the universe, what then? Which I'm given to understand by the indoor cat, who gave us some really helpful background in the US about this. Evolution and taking children out of school so that they would not be taught the evolutionary theory became far more of a political hot potato in the early 2000s. The groundwork was being laid for it in the late 80s, early 90s. Some religious people, Christians particularly, were taking children out of school, but it hadn't become the big movement that it would become in the early 2000s yet. So I think in that sense, this episode was a bit ahead of the curve on that. I assume that one of the writers had seen that it happens and had picked up on it and used it as a warning example given by Keiko. Vedic Gwyn says, we'll face those issues when we come to them. Still grasping into this kid for grim life. Keiko says, well, she says, I'm a teacher. It's my responsibility to expose my students to knowledge, not to hide it from them. The answer is no, the Bajorans all mutter. And Vedic Gwyn says, turning to the crowd, I've tried to be reasonable. And then leads all of them away from the classroom, and they all file past the two O'Briens who stand there still facing the classroom.
I remember that, and I think there's a great shot as well. The camera slightly pulls back and pans around as the crowds go round the O'Briens. It's quite a deft little shot that again is that great cinematography, and it kind of hammers home that you know this tide is breaking around them, and they are being left deserted.
Yeah, it's a really nice visual, the two people standing stock still, refusing to cede ground while everyone files past them.
Yes.
And as everyone has left, there is a small group of children left.
Yes.
There's Jake Sisko, who's taller than any of them, standing at the back, and I think he might have his hand on the shoulder of another. Nog is noticeable by his absence.
Yes.
I think that for this episode, the story didn't require him. There was a scene or two removed from the shooting strip, so I suspect that they were short on time. They didn't have anything in particular for Nog to do here, so they just didn't bring Aaron Eisenberg in for that day. It wouldn't have been fair just to have him standing silently. So no one mentions him. We pretend that Nog was there all along. It doesn't really matter.
I do think there might be a plot reason for that.
Oh!
I think when the Nagus came to visit that time, and they had their meal, and Nog wanted to get away and do his homework, and the Nagus was outraged, and Ron said, right, that's it, I'm pulling you out of that school. And we never followed up thereon, but I still think that stands.
For some reason, I thought he was back by the end of it. I'm very probably wrong, or that might just have been...
I might be wrong then, and that might have happened, because that was a long time ago. I can't remember if he was allowed back. Chat, if anyone out there can remember if... at the end of the episode of, I think it was called The Nagus, did Nog get reinstated at the school? Did Rom let him go back? I can't remember. I didn't think.
Yeah, I don't think we've had Nog in many, if any, episodes for some time now, and I don't think. I'm trying to remember whether the episode where Jake is teaching him 3 came after or before the Grand Nagus episode, because at that point he was definitely in school.
Listen, if it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. So let's just,
Sorry.
yeah, we will say that
This
for
is what
whatever
happens when you
reason,
talk about an entire series of television while drinking wine. Don't do it. It's not big or
it's
clever.
not a good idea. We do it so you don't have to. Look at us taking on this solemn responsibility.
Regard our foolishness and beware. Right, in the next scene,
Yes.
we're in Ops where Cisco, Kira, O'Brien, Odo, and Dax are gathered around. Cisco asks why the conduit reactivated if Aquino had deactivated, and O'Brien explains that the Cardassian equipment, the Cardassians equipped the power conduits with only one flow regulator per level. The computer could have realigned it, catching Aquino inside when the flow was restored. In that case, how did he and Neela know that it wasn't going to reroute the flow when that
That does. That's a really
it's
good
a
point.
reason. It's not a very good reason. Dax says, "You don't sound entirely convinced." Well, no, nor am I. O'Brien suspects foul play. Aquino had apparently borrowed one of Miles' tools without asking, which would have been very out of character. Keiko suggests it was 4 a.m. Maybe he didn't want to disturb you. And O'Brien says, the repairs could have waited. You never take your chief engineer's tools.
And I get that. I immediately got that and thought, yeah, I would believe that. I think a lot of societies, a lot of organizations would be absolutely don't take tools without asking. Both, from a rules standpoint, but also a cultural standpoint. I don't think you would. Like, I wouldn't pick up your laptop and just start using it without asking you. It's
Oh, absolutely. And from a safety standpoint as well, if O'Brien picks up his toolbox and runs to an emergency at the other end of the station, he needs to know that everything is in there.
100%.
So, yeah, it's a very good plot point. It absolutely makes sense that he picks up on, no, there's something missing. Something is wrong here.
Yes.
And then Odo leans in and says, "Are you suggesting it might not have been an accident?"
Like, his
Odo
little detective hackles are up.
Exactly. He gets to do a nice little bit of police forensic work here. It's great. O'Brien says, "I don't know what I'm suggesting." And Jake Sisko arrives in Ops in the background while he's talking and says, "I only know what I know. He should have asked." He knows that something's up. Cisco asks Odo to look into it and dismisses everyone. Cisco then says, "Hi," to Jake. And Jake says, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And Cisco, "Sure." And with a fatherly hand on Jake's back, he takes him into his office. And they then talk about what happened at the school. Cisco asks if Mrs. O'Brien called classes off. And Jake says, "No, there's only me and 4 other kids left, but she kept the school open." Keiko switched to a lesson about Galileo, who was tried by the Inquisition for teaching that the Earth moved around the sun. Cisco replies, "Tried and convicted. His books were burned." And Jake, he's a young kid, he says, "How could anyone be so stupid?" And Cisco says, "It's easy to look back 7 centuries and judge what was right and wrong." And Jake says, "But the same thing's happening now with all this stuff around the Celestial Temple and the wormhole. It's dumb." And Cisco pauses for a moment before saying, "No, it's not. You've got to realize something, Jake. For over 50 years, the one thing that allowed the Bajorans to survive the Cardassian occupation was their faith. The prophets were their only source of hope and courage." And Jake says, "But there were no prophets. They were just aliens that you found in the wormhole." And Cisco says, "To those aliens, the future is no more difficult to see than the past. Why shouldn't they be considered prophets?"
I love that line because that makes in-universe sense. And it does. It throws the whole thing open. It's like, well, everything that they describe as, miraculous behavior by gods, we see as a scientific anomaly. That's it. That is the core of the concept, not just the episode, but the concept of science versus religion. Maybe it's the same thing viewed from different angles. And I also liked that Cisco evoked the strength of Bajoran spirituality during the occupation. It clearly went from being something that they were passionate about to becoming the vital glue that held their society together. And it's still vital because, the moment the Federation turn up, Cisco's like, "I need to get the Kai on side," because the only person that could pull Bajoran society back together after fracturing is the religion. So that's it. That's why it's so integral to them. In chat, we were talking about were there ever any non-religious Bajorans, and we couldn't bring anyone to mind. We thought a bit about Ro Lauren, who was just a general renegade, really, in many ways, but she still wore, I believe, the ear clasp. Both as a cultural thing, but it is also a religious observation. So it is
I
clearly
think there is
something's
probably something similar to in our world.
hmm,
There is Islamic society where modes of dress.
sure.
Arabic is an incredibly religious language. Many of the words are based around the word Allah. Any expression of surprise or of joy
Mm,
often contains the word Allah.
mm,
Alhamdulillah, God will it.
mm.
And you cannot separate the culture from the religion within that culture. It's in the language, it's in the dress,
This
it's
is it.
in everything. And I think
This
it's
is it.
fair to say that's probably the same case on Bajor.
Hmm.
And as Dennis Bloodnock pointed out earlier, the prophets exist.
I mean, they
There's
are
no
there.
reason for anyone on Bajor to say, nah, they're not there actually, because they bloody well know that they are. They've got evidence from the orbs.
This is
They've
it.
got
You can go
Cisco
into a
himself
room.
knows that they exist and that they have the power to take him backward and forward. Oh, he has the power to take them backward and forward through his experiences in time.
Yes. There is
Yeah,
a room where you can just open a box and a religious orb will immediately bombard you with religious like stuff. It's real.
it's
It's
real.
happening. It's just you want to go, oh well, they're from another dimension, and it's like that's a get out. That's a get out. That lets you just say that God is an alien, and that's just going to lead us down a very strange path very quickly. So no, ultimately, it all boils down to you absolutely can see it from both sides, and it's a bit of a Star Trek trope, but I think this conversation was important and it needed to happen, and isn't it? We always loved scenes with the Cisco's because Ben Sisko's just the world's greatest dad. I think one of the many meme names is Space Dad for Cisco, and you just see it. You see it. He sits down and he helps his son work through this issue, and I love this scene. Oh, it was great.
Me too. I think towards the end of the scene, I think he takes one of Jake's hands in both of his own. He just sits there kind of stroking
Yeah,
his fingers with his thumb.
it's
It's just
natural.
so yeah, there is a lovely familial chemistry between Avery Brooks and Cyril Glofton. They just seem so comfortable with each
Mm-hmm.
other and so automatically affectionate.
Mm.
It's a really beautiful father-son relationship, which was rare to see then. I think probably rarer than it is now.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It's gotten better, but it's still, yeah, very rare, I think, to see a single black father looking after his son, a respected professional. I mean, just so many things were not familiar, I think, to 90s TV watchers at the time. And also, I loved that Jake says, what are you going to do? And Ben is very honest and open. He says, I don't know. And Jake says, are you worried? And he says, I am. And he's
Yes.
open about his concerns in front of his son, which is also something I would never expect to see even today. Somebody being that open and honest about their feelings in front of anyone, even a near family member. I think a lot of 90s television would have told you, stoic, keep it hidden, confident face, and all of that lying crap that helps no one. So I love that he was very honest about the fact that he was worried. Top
Yes.
marks.
And before the end of the conversation, there's a bit that I haven't included where Cisco says, my point is, it's a matter of interpretation. It may not be what you believe, but that doesn't make it wrong. If you start to think that way, you'll be acting just like Vedic Win, only from the other side. Which I think, as I've kind of alluded to, it wasn't a conversation that I think the overall culture was ready to have yet. But from a modern perspective, there's been far more talk about the evils of colonialism in
Mm.
recent years. The fact of many Indigenous children being kidnapped or forcibly educated out of their existing cultural practices and into a Western, either secular or more often Christian
Mm.
upbringing and way of life. And I think that was less spoken about then. It had been happening. It had been happening for for at least the last 100 years prior to the episode being filmed. But it wasn't in the public sphere to discuss in the same way that it is now. And I think that if it were made now, that colonialist element, that imposing an empirical education on people whose lifestyle is a very spiritual one, is to deprive them of something, is to destroy part of their culture. So it couldn't have happened here, and I don't blame them for not including it.
Mm-hmm.
But were it reshot today, I think that would have been part of the conversation. And I like the sensitivity that Cisco shows in saying, effectively does say that Vedic Win is in the wrong. You'll be doing the same thing as her if you take their religion away from them.
Mm-hmm. To me, it speaks to that whole we have to be intolerant of intolerance. There's no compromise. There's no, well, we need to see things from this person's point of view, because we have to at least at some point say this person's point of view is made up of suppressing other people's points of view. You cannot accommodate that. So this whole kind of, oh well, you just got to debate us, or well, you've got to, you say you're such a fan of free speech. What about your opinions are not part of the spectrum of accommodating one another's views. The moment you look to suppress another person's point of view, you lose that right, which I think is they were trying to get there, but as you say, very difficult to become that. I don't know, confrontational. It's a difficult topic to have, and I definitely think in
It
1996.
is. I think it would have required more historical literacy on the part of the general audience than could have been expected at that point. Before most people had the internet, before Black Lives Matter, before so many conversations have been had, which now have been and are ongoing.
Finally, it's nice, I think, to think of Star Trek as being an early forerunner, kind of dipping a toe into having these kind of conversations, looking at things these kind of ways. That I think is Star Trek good writing at its heart. You know, what if we thought about things in a more progressive, more enlightened way? It's
Yes, definitely, and it does a really good job of tackling the things that it does raise in this episode. I think it's incredibly impressive for when it was written. But we're at an hour and a half into the episode, our episode, and we're probably about 20 minutes into the episode.
Yes, come on, Kat, we've got to get on. You're right. Thank you.
And on the next scene, we've got image 9, which I think is a shot of the botanical gardens on oh no, it's a shot of the city in Bajor.
Yes.
Sorry, it's a panning shot of Bajor where
Lovely.
the buildings in the foreground pass more quickly than those in the background. Can't give an impression of that in a still photo, but it just looks more realistic than, for all that the watercolors used in TOS and TNG are beautiful. This gives more of an impression of a moving camera in a real space.
It is a gorgeous scene, and I think I read in the background as well that this is a reworked version of the matte painting from the first episode, another callback to the start of the series, when it was Bajor, but it was showing the scars of the occupation and the departure of the Cardassians. So I should have gone and dug up a picture.
Sorry, I hadn't even spotted that.
It just pops into my head now, but this is a reworked version, so you can now see Bajor as it should be, without the scars of occupation.
Oh, that's really lovely.
It is. But it's a lovely scene. Lovely image.
But we then cut to Cisco in what looks like a botanic garden, which I didn't get a picture of. It's got lush flowers and green plants and a waterfall. And he throws a stone into a pond, and the camera looks down at the pond. And as the ripples fade away, we see a figure wearing red appearing next to him. Again, it's just a lovely little artistic shot that they didn't have to include but chose to. And it's Vedek Bareil holding a forlorn bromeliad, which looks a heck of a lot like an Earth bromeliad. Cisco immediately bows his head and offers an ear to him, and Bareil laughs and says, "There's no need to pay tribute to me." And Cisco's a bit confused. He says, "Pay tribute? Usually when I meet one of Bajor's spiritual leaders, the first thing they do is grab my..." And Bareil says, "Ear? It's unpleasant, isn't it?" Cisco replies, "I've been far too polite to admit it." And it's a really sweet little conversation. Bareil tells Cisco about having his own ear grabbed often by a monk as a child because he often misbehaved. And he swore then that it would be one of his life goals to do away with that archaic ritual. So already we see a very different way of conducting the Bajoran religion compared with Wynn's view. Cisco says you can count on the Federation's support. We learn that Bareil has been listening to the 112 Vedeks talking all at once in their gathered assembly, and that this is his arboretum. He began his service at the monastery as a gardener, and at first all he wanted was to grow the most beautiful forlorn bromeliads on the planet, but the prophets did not allow me that peaceful life. And the scene effectively shows that there's a world of difference between he and Wynn. Both are Vedeks, but he is sincere, open, warm, he's grounded, he's practiced gardening, a very practical, pragmatic pursuit, while she seems to be far more politically minded, far more minded to her relationship to the prophets, whereas he's a little more offhand about it. The prophets didn't allow him the peaceful life he wanted as a gardener. Both have a calling, but Bareil seems compassionate while Wynn is dictatorial. And then I've put the bitchiest statement from Bareil. He says, "I understand my friend, Vedek Wynn, has brought her blessings to your station."
It's a great line, isn't it?
It's wonderfully delivered.
He's very dry as Bareil. I like it.
He's wonderful. Annoyingly, the actor reminds me an awful lot of the guy who played Captain Sinclair in the first series of Babylon 5. Complete coincidence, different actor, just a very similar face. And
see what you mean, yeah, I can see what you mean, and now I'll never unsee it, so thanks for that.
Sorry, brainworm by Bab 5. Cisco asks for an audience with the Assembly to discuss the school, as Bareil is the leading candidate for Kai, so he's the right person to ask. Bareil plants his bromeliad that he's been carrying and says that he's sorry, but the Vedic Assembly will not see Cisco. Cisco asks why, and Bareil says, Some fear you as the symbol of a federation they view as godless. Some fear you as the emissary who walked with the prophets. And some fear you because Vedek Wind told them to. Oh, we're all very good at conjuring up enough fear to justify whatever we want to do.
That's it. That boils the whole thing down perfectly for me. That there are bad motivations and political decisions and bureaucratic ineptitude and just a lot of people not thinking properly to solve a problem. It's the essence of it there. I love that.
It is. And I think they do a really good job of writing Bareil so that he is compassionate, warm, down to earth, and very shrewdly political.
Yes.
But he is overt in his shrewdness. He says what's going on. He tells Cisco, these are the reasons they won't meet with you. Not, the prophets are displeased and it will not take place, right?
Again,
He actually says, well, these are the
contrast.
reasons the people fear you. And he goes on to say that it would be impolitic for him to be aboard the
Sadly,
station
very
because so
true.
many Bajorans fear Cisco or fear him because of Wynn. He says that if the prophets will it, he will be made Kai, and he could be a better friend to Cisco then. And Cisco says, being my friend now might harm your chances. And Bareil says, the prophets teach us patience. Cisco says, it appears they also teach you politics. But there isn't an implication that Bareil is conspiring, is calculating in the same way that Wynn is. He's realistic, he's grounded, he understands that there is a political element here, and yes, he's willing to play it, he knows how the game works, but we feel that he is being open and honest with Cisco. He's a person that we can trust.
100%. You hear the sincerity in his voice when he says, I could be a better friend to you if I had the position and the power. And again, it just reminds you that this Vedic assembly is clearly not, the priests harbouring to the goodwill of the Bajorans, but a political power structure and nothing more than that. It's very cynical. And I think that is the beginning as well. Well, no, it's been established before, but this is a real shot in the arm for the thought that Deep Space Nine is a very intricate show that is going to look at things like this. It's going to actually, rather than rock up them to the planet of Hats and the government of Hats with the rebels and the government, and maybe the rebels are bad and the government's good, or it's the other way around this week. Wow, crazy. Who knew about that? Good rebels. And this time it's going to be like, how do structures work? How do people exercise power? What gives them their authority? What gives them their legitimacy? It's great. And it's going to be difficult. And it's going to be cynical. I hope you're ready for it.
My cynical little heart desires to see more.
Yay!
Oh. But for now, we're back in Ops, and Cisco arrives in a turbo lift.
Sorry.
Cisco notes that Ops is looking empty.
Can I make one last mad observation? Where they filmed in the Botanical Gardens is a place, I've put it in my notes at the last minute. It is, the Gardens of the Monastery were filmed in a park called Ferndale in Los Angeles, which was also the same place they filmed the holodeck sequence from Encounter at Farpoint, the season opener of TNT, where Data is whistling. It's the exact same park. So there you go. What a weird...
Oh, that's a delightful factoid. Thank you, Tim.
No worries. Now, please, Kat, do not let me drag us off course anymore. Take us back on.
Right, so Cisco notes that Ops is looking empty. Kira confirms 3 Bajoran crewmen didn't report for duty. They said they weren't feeling well. Cisco asks, do you think it's contagious, Major? Kira says it's too early to tell. And Cisco, this next bit feels very unsubtle. I think they had to convey a lot very quickly. Cisco asks, are your people willing to throw away everything we've accomplished during the past 7 months? Kira says, everyone knows if the Federation leaves, the Cardassians will be back. And Cisco replies, with all due respect, Major, protecting your borders is not the primary reason the Federation is here, and it's not why I'm here. I'm here to build a trusting relationship with your people, and I'd like to start feeling that somebody on your side is giving back to that effort. I think that what's happening here is that Cisco is frustrated with his conversation with Bareil. He didn't get the help that he needed. He's coming back to a very fraught situation aboard the station. Bajorans have gone missing from the crew. Unusually, he is very riled. He's acting from a place of emotion rather than from his calm collectedness.
Was my impression. It wasn't a wise thing he said, but it was a believable thing from a man on at the end of his tether who's been very, conflicted with stuff going on.
Yeah, who's already admitted to his son that he doesn't know what he's going to do, and the one course of action he has taken now has not worked. Yeah, Kira says, I thought you were here for all philosophies on the station. And Cisco says, you tell our sick Bajoran crewmen they better get well immediately or they'll recover on their way to their next assignment. Kira just says, yes, sir, and leaves the room. Which, yeah, the strange relationship between Kira and Cisco. I think it varies a little between episodes as to how strained it is, how friendly it is. Broadly speaking, it's got friendlier as time has gone on, but here we see it strained again. Odo and Bashir arrive, and Bashir has new evidence about Ensign Akito. Bashir has constructed the victim's DNA. It's definitely Aquino. I've probably called him Akito a couple of times. I apologize. It's called Aquino. And Bashir says, you see, the plasma disruption in his cellular membranes indicates he was exposed to a direct energy discharge before he was placed in the conduit. And longtime viewers of Star Trek will know that a directed energy discharge could only come from a phaser. And O'Brien says, a directed energy discharge from a phaser. And Odo replies, set to kill.
Set to kill. Yeah, it's a little bit heavy-handed, this whole scene.
They just keep bringing in Odo to say the one detective thing. He needs a
crime.
pair of sunglasses to put on before the credits roll.
Yeah!
But yes, Neela is standing impassively in the background. We then fade to black. We fade in on an exterior from Deep Space Nine, shot from below, just for a bit of variety, and we then cut to Cisco's office. Cisco asks, could this murder be related to the tensions over the school issue? And Kira says, if you're suggesting he was killed by a Bajoran just because he was with the Federation, I like that she said that. It's not his motive. It's got nothing to do with what's going on, but it's realistic.
Yeah,
that's what she thought he was implying.
Jump to that
did it because he was Bajoran and because this guy was Federation, and tensions are such that could have been motive enough.
Not impossible.
Bashir says analysis proves that he was killed the night before Vedic Wynn arrived, so before the school issue arose. Cisco asks, any ideas about a motive? And Odo isn't convinced, despite Aquino's log entry, that Aquino actually went to the conduit to repair it. He says the log could have been altered by our killer to cover his tracks. At this point, Odo starts gendering the killer as male.
Yes.
You can do this until we find out who it is, which instantly told me that it's almost certainly Neela, because we're looking for a female assailant. You say they or you say he or she in the 90s. It wouldn't have been he immediately unless you're trying to throw us off the scent. God damn it. But yes, Odo has checked the turbo lift records. Aquino did take a turbo lift to level 3, but not to the power conduit where he was found. Aquino went to runabout pad C. So O'Brien asks, a runabout? What was he doing in a runabout at 4 a.m? And this line made me cackle. Odo says, apparently he was getting murdered. Oh, I fucking love it. It's so bad and it's so funny.
It is. You know what? It is. I don't know if it's intentional or just accidental, but clearly Odo is relishing the chance to really exercise his detective skills.
This was out so long, as far as I know, before CSI Miami was conceived of.
Oh, yeah, absolutely it is. So maybe they took something from this. But he's loving it, and what a great liner. Can I also say as well, I love the lineup of the crew in front of Cisco's desk. It's really nice.
It is really nicely shot. I think every scene in this episode is very carefully thought about in terms of how it's choreographed. It's a lot more for the actors to remember. They've got to remember the technobabble, every one of their lines, everywhere they've got to walk to, all of their marks, which are not marked on the floor because you can see the floor at various points. It's a heck of a lot of information for everyone who is on camera and everyone behind the camera to retain, and they do such an elegant job of it. We cut to O'Brien returning to the airlock from the shuttle, and O'Brien says that everything in the runabout looks perfectly normal. Neela says it doesn't look like the airlock systems have been tampered with. O'Brien says, let's run a level 1 diagnostic on the runabout's computer interface, then we'll call it a day. Neela does this, and Neela says, I already have. Everything's normal, which has been so well set up. We saw her at the start of the episode, having done tests already before O'Brien had to prompt her. We know that she's quick. We know that she's efficient. There's no reason for us to suspect anything if she says she's already done the tests, because it's been set up a few minutes ago that she acts like this. It's so cleverly written. I've said that far too many times. I'm going to blame the wine. O'Brien says, if anything's happened around here, it's been pretty well covered up. And the two of them slump against a wall together. And Neela asks, did you know him well? O'Brien says, not just the welcome aboard if you need anything speech. And Neela says that she didn't know him either. She says Bajoran and Starfleet officers don't socialise much. O'Brien asks, how come? And she guesses we just keep to ourselves. O'Brien says that she's not like that with him. And Neela smiles and says, he's not like the others. You know, you just don't put on any airs. You're just nicer. And they're sitting next to each other. She smiles at him. So, of course, O'Brien's hugely uncomfortable and has to stand up and go, I'll close up here. You get going. I'm just like, oh, for God's sake. Your workmates. You've been in conduit tunnels together staring at human remains. Why have you got to be weird because you actually like each other? And she smiled once. But in 90s parlance, a woman smiling at a man that she's in close contact with means that she fancies him.
It is very lazy writing, and you know, in more enlightened writing might have gone, you know, great, I'm getting on well with Neela. She could be like a protege to me. I could mentor her and make her to be the best engineer she possibly could be. Is what I would hope would happen. But you're right, it falls too easily into that. You could maybe justify that we know O'Brien is a bit of a clumsy, emotional guy. He's not good at you know subjects, and he might honestly think that you know respect and that professional affection from a subordinate is romantic interest.
I think that's the kind of thing I expect from Bashir. Who just
no, he would hope it was romantic interest. Why? I think you're very nice as well, and then you have to, you know, stun him. You know, just get off of me.
Poor the autistic boy.
Sorry, Bashir. Poor Bashir. You know, he hasn't done anything daft in several episodes, and we're immediately wailing on him.
Enough. It's just not a funny enough episode for Bashir to be. But anyway, O'Brien offers to close up while Neela takes off, and then O'Brien says, "On your toes, O'Brien." What his wife said to him at the start of the episode.
Unnecessary addition, but I guess they felt they had to throw in a slightly funny scene. I don't know. It fell flat for me, but
I guess they throw in a funny moment at a time when he's just been sitting next to a murderer. It throws us off the scent a bit more, maybe. We then cut to a group of Bajorans leaving an airlock and entering the promenade. The camera moves to Odo at a table. Quark walks up, his only scene in this episode, I think, and says, "You were looking for me? Don't tell me. There's a Bajoran convention on the station I didn't know about. Thanks, Odo. I need to call in more Dabo girls." And I'm just charmed by Quark's assumption that Odo has called him over to give him a hand with his business.
When would that ever happen?
Odo says it's not a convention. They're from an orthodox spiritual order coming to support Vedic Wind's effort to keep the Bajoran children out of school, which is a nice little bit of storytelling. We know who the people are. And for the second time in 2 episodes, we've got Quark as the everyman who is watching Bajorans arrive on the station, and either explaining or having it explained to him who they are. And in both cases, it's a little... Quark is a comedy character to a large extent, still. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
So to have him as the, Odo explaining to him, this is who these people are. Oh yeah, these people were tortured, weren't they? I've heard about them. He's like,
do they want to gamble? Jesus Christ. Not now.
Have to be this bumbling capitalist.
Yes.
But anyway, Quark says, orthodox. In that case, I'll need twice as many Dabo girls, which I enjoy. I like the prod at the hypocrisy of many Orthodox religious people.
Love that.
Not all by any extent, but a remarkable number. So yes, Odo says that this is not what he wanted to discuss. What does Quark know about the Ensign Aquino murder? And Quark says, you wound me all these years together. I thought you knew me, Odo. I'm not a killer. Odo responds, no, but most of your friends are. And Quark agrees and says he'd gladly sell one to Odo if he could, but unfortunately none of them had taken credit for the murder. So Odo asks him to keep his ears open, and Quark says, are you kidding? That's the 7th rule of acquisition. They nod to each other, and Quark leaves.
Beautiful. Can I just say, I love that whole sequence. Every single part of it was just expertly delivered. 2 brilliant actors on a brilliant little subplot. They are superb together. I loved every single moment of that.
They're such strong character actors behind a heck ton of makeup, and they still manage to get so much emotion and so much character through it. It's beautiful.
Exactly. There's the Bakery Dragon as well. Yes, of course they are, and I gladly sell them out. And it's beautiful. No hesitation. Yeah, most of my friends are killers. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'd sell them to you for a heartbeat. but
his friends really know that.
Yeah, exactly. It's so immediately, quickly, wonderfully cynical in Star Trek, which is all like, bad people are bad and good people are good. And then it's like Quark, who's like, I just want to make some money.
Yeah.
It's great. Love it.
In the same shot, Odo looks up and we cut to O'Brien walking down one of the spiral staircases to join him. O'Brien says, "This is a security bypass module," and he hands Chip to Odo. O'Brien didn't find it at the runabout pad C, which was clean as a whistle apparently. That chip showed up at runabout pad A. Aquino never went near pad A. It doesn't make sense. And Odo replies, "On the contrary, it makes perfect sense. Aquino went to pad C because he'd spotted an anomaly in the security net. He interrupted whoever was responsible and was killed. The killer put the body in the conduit and instead of returning to pad C, changes his plan, and moves to pad A." And O'Brien says, "But what was the plan? Everything else seems normal." Odo says, "I guess someone wanted to steal a runabout." And O'Brien says, "But we're not missing one." And Odo says, "It's curious. He goes to a lot of trouble to defeat the security net and then doesn't go through with," and then he's interrupted by an explosion which rocks the station. O'Brien immediately shouts, "The school!" It's wonderful. It's very natural. It interrupts the scene very nicely.
Mm-hmm.
O'Brien immediately gets up and runs across the promenade. An alarm blares as he and Odo run through the busy promenade to the site of the school. I've got an image of a huge burst of flames coming towards them. As we've noted in a few episodes, there are live flames on the set. They've set fire to a section of the set. I think that the explosion itself probably has some CG light added to it to give the impression that the flame is more dangerous than it is and is bursting out towards the cast. So it looks very impressive and unnervingly so. O'Brien shouts for Keiko, and Odo is physically trying to pull him back from the classroom because O'Brien assumes that Keiko is in the room. He doesn't know what Jake Sisko said earlier, that she would be teaching her classroom in one of the cargo holds today. So he assumed she was in her classroom. And Keiko comes up, running up to them from behind, and Miles holds her while Odo goes to restrain the crowd. A Bajoran fire attendant then comes on set and blasts the fire with a hose. And I can't, because of the definition of the awful film, I can't tell whether it's actually spraying water with all the fire smoke.
I couldn't see it. I couldn't see anything.
But the impression is that someone has run up with a hose and spraying water everywhere, which aboard a station that has loads of electrical is an odd choice. I would have thought that foam or either gas foam, dry powder would have been the better choice, but no, water. But that said, we didn't see any water. Maybe it's a chemical that the Bajorans used to quell fire. We just don't know. We're now in the burnt-out classroom. Cisco, Kira, Neela, and Odo are entering. Unfortunately, I didn't get a picture of this one. Kira reads traces of cabradine and infernite, which are fictional Star Trek substances, which are common explosives and both easily obtainable. So Odo comments, "Then we're looking for a simple homemade bomb." The crowd outside is clamoring, so the team leave the schoolroom. The burnt set is shot from an angle that we haven't seen before, so I can't actually tell whether it was the same classroom that they destroyed to use here, or whether they just created a separate burnt room. I don't know. I think from its position on the promenade, it may have been the same space. They might actually have taken out the electrical stuff and torched the classroom set, which would have had to have been a very controlled fire. But again, they've had fire live on set quite a few times. They've got someone who is familiar with controlling fire around the cast. So they probably did have a controlled fire.
I think so.
Frederick Wynne approaches through the busy crowd, asking, "Where is Mrs. O'Brien?" She too probably didn't know that Mrs. O'Brien wouldn't be teaching in the classroom that day. Cisco says her husband took her home. Frederick Wynne, "Was she hurt? Was anyone hurt?" Cisco says no. And Frederick Wynne says, "The prophets have been kind today." Cisco responds, "The prophets had nothing to do with what happened here today. This was the work of a disturbed and violent mind who listened to your voice, not the prophets. There's a crowd gathered around them, and he is orating to them at this point." Like, go Cisco. Vedic Wynne says, "Is the emissary holding me responsible for this act of terrorism?" And unusually, I've brought an image which isn't from the episode itself. It is a graph which was produced using Google. And I found it in a Guardian article by David Shariat Madari, dated 28th of January 2015. The graph shows the use of the words terrorist and terrorism in English language texts between the years 1880 and 2000. I was just interested because the word terrorist has gained so much disapprobation in my lifetime that I wanted to see where the use of it was at the point when this episode was filmed. and shown. And as the graph shows, the use of the word terrorism was not uncommon throughout the 20th century, but it peaked in the early 80s, and saw a sharp resurgence in the late 1980s, and was still in very high use in the 90s. So to me, that tells us that a viewing audience then would have recognized the word. It would have carried an emotional weight because it's in the press, because it's been used to describe various acts that people are familiar with.
Yeah.
And that will have informed the use of the word terrorist and terrorism in this episode.
Wow.
So Cisco says the commander of this station is holding Vedek Wynn responsible. Vedek Wynn says, may the prophets forgive you for abandoning them. Again, she claims to speak on behalf of them. Cisco, you claim the prophets as your personal constituency, Vedek Wynn. I'm not convinced that's justified. Who do you speak for? An order that's barely listened to in your assembly. So you come here looking for a more receptive audience. Neela is standing behind him in the background, watching him at this point. Vedek Wynn says, is that what your friend Vedek Barile told you? He's as misguided as you are. No, that's not fair. You are not simply misguided as I once thought. Now I see you want nothing less than to destroy us, which is bloody rich when the bombs set off, which Cisco definitely did not place.
Yeah.
Vedek Wynn says, you live without a soul, Commander. And at this point, I really wish that the crowd had been responding. I would have liked to have heard, ooh, from the friends who are gathered around. Because you don't just tell a man that he's living without a soul. Them's fighting words.
Right? This scene is visceral. You know, I know in the chat that the Indoor Cat, one of our oldest colleagues on this podcast, has said that they got really riled up when this happened. You know, and it's a horrendous scene. Sorry, please keep taking us forward.
I was taking a sip of wine. I'm good. So we've got the burnt out classroom behind them. And Cisco, quietly but confident. Oh, no. First, sorry, she's told him that he lives without a soul. Vedek Wynn goes on to say, you and your federation exist in a universe of darkness, and you would drag us in there with you. But we will not go. It's very evocative, very strong language, strong imagery. And Cisco quietly but confidently says, you have just made your first mistake, Vedek. Have I? And Cisco gives a speech, which I'm going to give you in full because I've had a wine. It's a good speech. The Bajorans who have lived with us on this station, who have worked with us for months, and both Kira and Neela are framed just behind Cisco here. They're deliberately shown in the shot. Who helped us move the station to protect the wormhole. And he appeals to the crowd, who joined us to explore the Gamma Quadrant, who have begun to build the future of Bajor with us. These people know that we are neither the enemy nor the devil. And the Netflix subtitles have murmurs of agreement from the crowd at this point.
Oh, nice.
Cisco turns to look directly at Kira and Neela, and he says, we don't always agree. We have some damn good fights, in fact, but we always come away from them with a little better understanding and appreciation of each other. You won't succeed here. The school will reopen, and when your rhetoric gets old, the Bajoran parents will bring their children back. Vedek Wynn has stopped smiling at this point. I haven't got a picture of this until right at the end of the episode, but she looks like she's been sucking a lemon. She looks extremely displeased. But she now readjusts her face into a very forced smile and says, we'll see. Cisco then turns and walks through the crowd away from Wynn. Kira exits to the right. Neela remains alone on the platform, holding her toolbox, looking towards Vedek Wynn, who holds her gaze. Neela gently nods, then leaves too. But there's a really quick transition to the next scene. There's no kind of time, there's no sting of music, there's no fade to black that tells us that that was a significant glance exchange between the two of them. It's quick. If you were glancing away from the screen at that moment, you might have missed it. It's subtle, but it's there. And we cut quickly to Cisco arriving in ops via turbo lift again. There is now an appreciable number of Bajoran staff members working in ops.
Yep.
The shot is over ops as a whole. We get that lovely image of the entire room framed within the shot. Cisco walks past all the Bajorans up to O'Brien and asks how Keiko is. O'Brien says she's pretty shaken up, but planning to hold classes tomorrow in one of the small cargo bays. Cisco says to tell her Jake will be there on time. O'Brien says she'll feel better for hearing that. Cisco asks about Akina, and O'Brien tells her about the Pad A bypass module. O'Brien has put security seals in place on all 3 pads and is checking for other anomalies. Dax tells Sisko about an incoming transmission, if I can get my wine adult's tongue around that word, from Vedek Bareil, who is on an incoming Bajoran transport.
Did you notice that Neela is sat at a console in between them all, very quietly listening in?
She is. I think she moves behind
Intentionally.
Sisko while he's talking to Bareil. Subtle, but she's there. Yes. Bareil has decided to accept Sisko's invitation. You did invite me to tour your facility. I looked back through the script. There's no such offer made.
No.
Bareil fighting Sisko into cahoots with him.
Exactly. It's very coded.
His own people and the people aboard the station don't notice. But again, it's because he's conspiring with Sisko, it doesn't feel sinister. It feels as if he is acting in Sisko's interests.
Yes.
So Sisko agrees and apologizes that there's been some damage on the promenade. He says we won't have time to clean it up before Bareil arrives. Bareil says, perhaps I can help you to clean it up, which I'm pretty sure is also a code of I'm going to help you clear up the situation.
Yes, that's exactly how I interpreted it as well.
He's a politician, he's cunning, he is clever, but he's making a genuine offer of help here. He's not going behind the backs of anyone.
I did wonder, what do you think motivated Bareil's change in mind? I think it could be a number of things. I don't know if he thought it was political expediency or if he felt a true moral calling that this was the right thing to do.
My instinctive feeling was that it was because there had been an explosion and he saw that the situation was far more dire than he had anticipated. He felt a genuine need, as effectively the next Bajoran leader expected, to go aboard and to make a strong statement that this was not acceptable, to go up and clean it up, to help. I just unquestioningly actually assumed that it was a moral imperative, that he felt that explosion warranted his involvement in a way that just a difficult political situation perhaps didn't. Yeah,
I like the sound of that. Thank you. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, were there any other theories that you had about why he might have come aboard?
I wondered if that whole confrontation on the promenade, where Sisko had his great Starfleet, Star Trek captain moment, where he was like, the things that are different about us are what's best about us, and he was just like, you know what, I can get behind this guy, he's clearly got, the right motivations, and I do not now worry about associating with Sisko. I think it's actually the right thing to do, so I think it could be any of these, but definitely.
There were a lot of Bajorans in the crowd, so it's not impossible that he would have heard from one of them what Sisko had said, what Sisko's stance was.
Yeah. Exactly. I think you could read it both and it still leads to the same place, definitely. And then
Sisko accepts his offer of help, smiles and looks thoughtful. The next scene is in the Deep Space Nine Bajoran chapel, where Vedek Wynn is quietly talking to a monk. Neela enters and Wynn nods for the monk to leave. Wynn says, "My dear, you should not be here." And Neela says, "Vedek, they found out about the runabout. And if we didn't know before then, we damn well know now." It's inspiring. Vedek is saying, "Look, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be talking to me in public."
That's
because she had told her to do it. Because she's evil. But Neela then says, "I have no way to escape." And Vedek Wynn replies, "Then we must accept that as the will of the prophets."
We must.
Neela more strongly puts it, "But if I go through with this now, I will be caught and executed." Vedek Wynn takes Neela's hands in her own and says, "The sacrifices the prophets call on us to make are great sometimes, my dear, but the rewards they give will last through eternity." And Neela nods her acceptance. And there is just so much in this short scene. We've learned that Neela's betraying the Deep Space Nine crew. The implication is that she definitely killed Aquino.
Yep.
Vedek Wynn is not only behind the scheming, but she's willing to throw her own co-conspirator onto the bus. She doesn't even take a moment to think about other alternatives. There's no, we will think of something, or even the prophets will provide. There's just, sacrifices, prophets, how it is. She doesn't care about her own people.
There was no hesitation about then and bullshit about we must accept these sacrifices. It's absolutely empty promises, because
she has made no sacrifices herself.
None.
She shows no evidence that she intends to. She's asking everyone around her to give things up. She's asking this woman to give her life. Having murdered someone is not even a justified martyrdom.
It's not. It's absolutely not, and it's not even coming from a place of religious zealotry, although it is a bit. It is clearly more that.
I think that's an open question. I think by the end of it, I don't feel clear about how much of Vedic Wynn's religiosity is real and how much of it is politicking.
Exactly.
I don't know how devout she is. I genuinely can't tell, and I don't think the script gives that up. I think she genuinely believes in the prophets. She has probably persuaded herself that they're on her side and that justifies anything she might choose to do. But yeah, she might just be a hypocrite. She might not even believe in them. She might just be using them to get to the treasured position of Kai.
Exactly. I am currently showing that picture of them in the temple, and it's incredible. In this one single frame, Louise Fletcher is portraying Vedic Wynn, just incredibly calculating look on her face under that stupid Sydney Opera House hat.
With a very young person, I think she appears to be in her early 20s, standing opposite, saying, "I'll die if I do this." And her leader is telling her, "Well, that's the will of the prophets then."
What a scene! What a powerful image! and the indoor cat is just immediately, I can't stand her so much, and it's what a testament to the actor and the writers to create a character that we have very quickly grown to loathe, and
absolutely. She's appeared for the first time in this episode. We hated her immediately. She's great and terrible.
And we've talked about Star Trek villains before, and there are some standout villains we've seen in The Next Generation, like Gul Madred or Q, arguably, but there's nobody that's channeled so much hatred in one character so quickly.
I don't think there's any other character that people dislike as much as Vedic later Kai Wynn, which is a great testament to Louise Fletcher. She does such a great job.
100%.
Yes. And moving on to the next scene, in the shooting script, there was an additional scene which is missing. And I don't know whether they shot it and then had to cut it for time or whether they never shot it. But there was originally a scene of Bareil arriving at the station and being greeted by Sisko and Kira. Bareil notes that Kira's heart might be with Vedic Wynn. Kira responds that after what's happened, she doesn't know what to think anymore. And I think it works. The show works really well without that scene. And it also keeps a bit of distance between what we've just learned about Wynn and Kira expressing her cynicism about Wynn. I think it might have been confusing for an audience to think, well, does Kira know what she's just done? Kira hates her despite knowing what she's just done. It's a bit clearer in my mind just to not have that scene, and we skip straight to O'Brien in Ops. He's leaning over a panel and Dax is in the background. O'Brien has found, this is lovely. This is one of these little bits of technical whiz-jiggery that Deep Space Nine likes to indulge in. O'Brien has found a sub-program he doesn't recognize called ANA. Computer says that file is protected by a personal security access code.
Yes.
O'Brien says, on whose authority? And the computer says, Chief of Operations, Miles O'Brien.
That's me.
Very obviously not. The computer can access the file without the right security code. O'Brien tells Dax that he needs to do a manual isolation of an anomalous file in the security field subsystem. Dax replies that file is going to be protected by a series of encryption sequences. I'll run an adaptive program. And O'Brien comments that for once we're lucky we're working with a Cardassian computer. It shouldn't have more than 7 sequences, which I think we might have bombed up against in an episode previous to this one, but I'm not going to go looking it up. Dax starts beginning the decryption, and a little circle of grids appears on a grid of circles appears on Dax's screen, and numbers and letters start appearing in them. The code to open the file is starting to be revealed as the computer decodes it, and there's a very tangible relationship between what they're trying to achieve on a computer screen and what they want to get in the real world. It really feels as if Deep Space Nine is informed by people who knew computers and how they worked and could adequately translate that onto a space station. We get a shot of Bareil's Bajoran transport arriving and docking at Deep Space Nine, and then rather than a greeting of Sisko and Kira, we get the clamoring crowd outside the airlock on the promenade, all of them reaching their hands towards Bareil as he arrives. The shooting script points out that he is expected to become Kai, which is why the crowd is so excited to meet him. He's led by Major Kira and followed by Sisko. Odo and his security team are managing the crowd, making room for Bareil to pass. Bareil is smiling, glad to be greeted in this way by all the people. He picks up and carries a child.
Yes.
Both of them grabbing children. The shooting script has a really nice little description. Bareil pauses to mix with the people, smiling, chatting, being spiritual.
Being spiritual.
Being spiritual, which is just a nice way of encapsulating that kind of. It is political. It is the baby kissing nonsense that particularly American politicians indulge in. Yes, Tim is raising his hand. Which politician was it who did that? I think there was one particular male American politician who was posed in that
It might have been
position.
like a Kennedyism or something like
It was
that.
probably a Kennedy. Bareil and those surrounding him walk under a footbridge, and I'm about to wax lyrical about the cinematography again. The camera person is standing on the footbridge, shooting down towards the crowd. So as the crowd passes under the bridge, the camera necessarily looks down at the carpeted bridge before looking out at the other side. It's one shot carried across. And as it crosses the bridge, 2 feet come into view.
I love it.
And the feet walk across the bridge. And there's a hand hold, and as it pans upwards, there's a hand holding a toolbox. The leg is wearing a uniform the same color as Neela's. And it's obvious that what has happened, the person that has walked across the bridge, also watching Bareil pass below.
Yep.
A huge crowd of extras who have been choreographed to walk and start and carry on at exactly the right pace so that the camera can follow Neela and then pick up the Vedek.
It's very
Bareil
well coordinated.
And then the camera pans up so that we see that it is Neela.
Mm-hmm.
And she is what, and it's just beautiful. The implication that she has been watching him throughout, without just shooting from over her shoulder for the entire shot. It's a creative way of showing that she has been there, and it suddenly reveals to us that she was there rather than showing it from her point of view.
Exactly.
It's just such a good decision.
Great, and it plays to the strength of the set. That we have it's 2 levels. You know, you can stand in different places. You're not just on the same deck, as is always the case in TNG. It's great.
Yes.
And we've always talked about our love of the depth of the DS9 set, and it's just a great, unusual sequence. So, yeah, I also picked up
wonderful,
on that.
And they make such great use of it. So yes, we're back in OBS now, where O'Brien is at a screen showing the last digit of the security code appearing, and he calls to the computer to access subprogram ANA code 4100RLX. O'Brien says identify commands within the file, and the computer says commands are sequential overrides of security fields approaching runabout pad A. O'Brien says the force fields display sequences on screen, and a map of the station appears on screen showing the affected force fields running from the runabout pad, which is on the outside of the circle, inwards towards the promenade. And Dax comments right to the promenade. And O'Brien says computer run a level 3 sensor sweep of the promenade, report any anomalous reading. He then says an escape route. That's escape from what? O'Brien says, you got me. The computer reads one anomalous reading detected. A subspace relay was activated in the security office 9 minutes 7 seconds ago. And the computer can't tell them what it was activated to do. It says unknown, insufficient data. O'Brien heads down there while Dax runs a diagnostic on the other security systems. O'Brien voice activates the turbo lift saying promenade, which I don't think they usually do. You don't get people shouting at the turbo lift as they get into it.
No, they don't. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I don't. Every turbo lift in every other spaceship has been voice activated, but in Deep Space Nine, probably because they use them so often. I guess more often we get people arriving than leaving, though. So it's probably that they've spoken the command when they walked in and we see them arrive and they don't have to say anything. But yeah, he shouts promenade as he gets into the lift, which I don't think is consistent. Anyway, when they, let's see, the crowd, we're on the crowded promenade again. Odo and security are managing the crowd as Bareil moves through it towards the chapel. And when the crowd arrives at the chapel, Wynn is already there. And sure enough, she grabs Bareil by the ear immediately without asking and says, I expected you sooner, Bareil. And he very gently and unostentatiously takes her hand away from his ear and holds it in both of his, saying, it seems our paths have grown apart. Perhaps we can bring them together again. And she, presumably through gritted teeth, says, I would like nothing better than that. So Bareil says, come with me to the school. Let us both show our commitment to a peaceful resolution to this series of events. And Vedek, after a pause, says, of course. And Bareil keeps hold of her hand as they walk together, holding it up so that the surrounding people can see that they're hand in hand, they're working together. It's subtle and it's gentle, and I like it a great deal. It speaks to his gentleness as a character and his genuine desire to bring people together and to stop the conflict.
You believe that although this is a political moment, he is doing it for the right reasons, which is it's important to unite people and together condemn this thing. You know, I recognise that Kai Wynn has stirred this. Vedek Wynn has stirred this up. This is an opportunity for her to step down and be humble and own this and fix it. I think I truly believe Bareil has come with the best of intentions.
I think he does, though I think it's arguable. I've just noticed there is a parallel between she grabs his ear, he grabs her hand and keeps hold of it.
Yeah.
In theory, she could let go, but on screen it looks as if he is holding her hand, and she's not pulling away because she knows it would be politically
it would not look
wrong
good
to do so.
So there is
but
also
it is nonetheless a bit of an act of force there. It's not ideal. He didn't ask for her hand.
This is good, yes, and there is a little bit of discussion of consent going on in the chat there. So yes, absolutely. But I think we should just view this in terms of this is a political gesture, and that's how it should be viewed.
Yes. The camera then lets them pass with the crowd. As the crowd walks past the camera, we see Neela, perhaps a little sad, but otherwise impassive, calmly walking at the same pace as the people around her.
Definitely got an expression of sadness, of horrible resignation on her face, definitely.
O'Brien enters the security office. O'Brien scans the computer with his tricorder and says, "Computer is the subspace device integrated into the isolinear coprocessor." Wow. That's what Neela was doing at the start of the episode. He asked her if she'd reinitialized the isolinear coprocessor, and we come back to it here. And yeah, I put in my notes, oh my God, is it the isolinear coprocessor? That's why she did such a thorough job, and why she tested it herself at the start of the episode, because she planted a device that when we saw her reaching in, she'd planted a device in there, right in front of our noses.
Right at the beginning, it's where it all began.
Gorgeous. O'Brien calls through to Dax. His voice is low. He's either downhearted or angry.
He knows.
And Dax says, "Didn't you just repair that unit 2 days ago?" And O'Brien, with an intake of breath, and he kind of puts his hand down as a fist as he walks past the desk. "Yes, I did. With Neela." Back on the promenade, Neela is still in the crowd. The camera pans up to Bareil, who has Kira, Cisco, and Keiko behind him, and he's still holding hands with Wynn at the classroom entrance. And Frederick Bareil is making a speech to the crowd. He says, "Looking around at your faces, I believe that you feel the shame that I feel at this sight." O'Brien is back in the security office. O'Brien, no, it's got to be the weapons detector in the promenade. That's the only thing the coprocessors could possibly affect. And Dax says that all weapon detectors appear to be functional. O'Brien says, Neela is real good. She can make it look like they're normal. He calls through to Cisco, who walks backwards into the burnt-out classroom to take the call away from the two Vedeks. Bareil is saying, "Once our world was a center of learning. It attracted travelers from many other worlds." And his voice then fades down so that we can hear what Cisco is saying. O'Brien tells Cisco that he thinks the weapon detectors on the promenade may have been disabled. Cisco asks, "What do you mean? You're not sure?" Because it's unusual for O'Brien. O'Brien says, "I mean Neela may have disabled them." Vedek Bareil is still holding Vedek Wynn's hand, and she is still not smiling. He says, "To reject violence is a solution, to join hands with all peoples and begin trust again." It's a good speech. Holding hands, saying to join hands with all peoples.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a good orator, is this guy. And nicely, the crowd starts clapping. And the way that they clap, instead of two hands together, they fist one hand and rest the other hand on top of it to make the clapping noise. Every single Bajoran who's gathered does that. And it's not, nobody names it, nobody says anything about it, no one shows it deliberately to the camera. No. It's just a way of distinguishing a Bajoran celebration or applause from a standard Earth one, or a widely set Earth one. I don't know whether all cultures clap in applause. So, oh yeah, I also said in my notes, damn, this is on the nose for a dude who's about to be subjected to an assassination attempt. To reject violence is a solution. Boom.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Cisco looks out over the crowd who are clapping. The rest of the sequence is in what I assume is very expensive slow motion. Every frame in this sequence is very clear. It's as clear as the footage in Deep Space Nine ever gets. There is a bit of grain to it, but there's no blur in people's movements. And for a moment, I actually thought that they might have the actors moving in deliberate slow motion, but there's no wobble. It looks too clean and consistent for that.
Yeah.
My guess is that rather than just filming it on their usual film and then slowing the footage down, they've shot it on film with more frames per second so that it captures more moments and it runs more smoothly when played in slow motion. Because I've seen so many films from the 90s and I think after where they've had a slow motion sequence and it blurs together. It doesn't look like a series of pictures, and here it does.
Yeah,
and this is Deep Space Nine, where the film quality is generally not good, so I think this was a very expensive sequence to make, and they did.
It looks great.
It does. The camera is trained on the crowd. In image 12, if you'd be kind enough to bring it up, Tim, we see Neela moving slowly between people. She's the only one who hasn't raised her hands to clap, and her face is grave.
And everyone around her, now we're looking at it, everyone around her is looking jubilant and happy and content, and she stands out. Yes. She's in grey, everybody else is in bright primary colours. It's
yes, you're right. There's a lot done to distinguish her in the shot. Yeah, it's really nicely done. Sisko has seen her, and he turns slowly, to everything happens slowly, to look at Vedek Bareil, who is facing away from the camera, having moved so that there is a crowd in front of and behind him, and he's still holding Vedek Win's hand. The next shot, Neela reaches into her toolbox, takes out a Bajoran phaser. The next image is of Neela raising her phaser in the crowd.
There it is.
Sisko sees this and shouts, "No!"
Big no.
Right dramatically. Bareil then turns to face Neela because he's heard Sisko shout. Sisko is pushing through the crowd to get towards her. So you think she fires her phaser but misses, aiming over Bareil's shoulder and hitting a bulkhead. And then we've got two fantastic images of Avery Brooks as Sisko taking a flying leap at Neela.
And as we clearly discussed, it is clearly Avery Brooks in this first shot, leaping.
They've done it in slow motion and from the front. They couldn't have had a stand-in stunt actor doing this. I can only assume that they've got several mattresses on the floor for him to land on. But we then see in the next shot him landing on Neela, knocking the phaser, which he's firing again already. He knocks it out of her hand and knocks her to the floor. We then resume normal speed of film as Sisko restrains Neela and Odo starts taking her away. Kira runs up and Neela says, "The prophet spoke. I answered their call," as she's pulled away by Odo, and she repeats that. "The prophet spoke. I answered their call," as she's being pulled away. I think there is, it's fairly clear that she is a true believer. She absolutely believes that the prophets thought this was the right thing to do. She has been badly misled by her religious leader in Vedek Win.
100%.
Sisko and Kira exchange glances, and then in the next image, there's a shot of Vedek Win unsmiling.
I think this is the definitive Vedek Win. There she is.
With the lemon-sucking glory. When she stops smiling, she looks
incredible.
There's just so much anger. There's a lot of power in that gaze. We then cut to exterior Deep Space Nine, and then to Kira in ops, resting her chin on her folded arms. Oh no, we don't.
We've skipped ahead. A very crucial moment.
We can put that in editing, right, Tim? So Sisko has just knocked Neela to the floor.
Yes.
We're back to normal speed now. Sisko restrains Neela and Odo takes her away. She has shouted that the prophet spoke. I answered that call. Sisko and Kira exchange glances, then look to Vedek Win. I've just repeated far more than I needed to. I'm blaming the wine. Cut here. Bareil looks to Win, then is escorted away from the scene by one of the monks. Kira grabs Win by the arm and says, "It was all to get him here, wasn't it? The school, the protest, the bombing. You knew that would get him out of the monastery. You did it all to kill him, to stop him from becoming Kai." And Win doesn't respond. She looks at Kira for a moment, then just turns away, takes her arm back, and walks away, followed by one of the monks. She doesn't respond to the allegation at all. Kira then turns to Sisko, who's watching Win leave, and I put in my notes, presumably well aware that they can't prove her guilt. They've got no reason, no formal reason to prevent her from going back to Beijing.
And they know Neela will not admit to anything. They know at this point somebody that, I'm going to say indoctrinated, is not going to give anything up.
So we now cut to exterior Deep Space Nine, cut to Kira in ops, resting her chin on her folded arms. Sisko arrives in the turbo lift behind her, and Sisko says, Neela insisted she acted alone, unless you want to consider the Prophets co-conspirators. Kira says she'll never tell us the truth. We'll never be able to prove that Wynn was involved. As you said, Tim, they know. Sisko asks if she's okay, and Kira gives a nice little speech saying, okay, I've forgotten okay. I haven't seen okay in what seems like years. I was just sitting here thinking, last year at this time, I was fighting the Cardassians in some nameless swamp. If you'd stopped by and told me that just 1 year later, they'd be gone and I'd be wearing this uniform up here in charge of protecting some wormhole. And Sisko says, protecting your celestial temple. And Kira responds, I envied Vedek Wynn because she was a true believer. I wanted my faith to be as strong as hers. Sisko replies, maybe it is. And I just really like that. I like that bit of, there's maybe a little bit of saviorism there. There's a bit of, we're going to put these very, very balanced. He's going to remind her of her religion. He's going to be the one to bring her back to her Victorian.
It's a very Trek way of summing it up, isn't it? A very Trek way of, you know what, after all, maybe you taught me something.
It's a quick shorthand of showing his sympathies, that he is very, very correct, very right on. But it does work well. In this very quick scene, it displays what it needs to. Sisko then says, I've got a report to put together for Starfleet. You ought to get some rest. And Kira says, I'd rather help you, Commander. I heard what you said to Vedek Wynn at the school. I just want you to know you were right, what you said about the Bajorans, at least about me. I don't think that you're the devil. And they both smile at each other. Sisko says, maybe we have made some progress after all. And he puts a friendly hand on her back and they walk together into his office as we cut to credits. So yeah, that was the last episode of season 1.
It is. And I'm just going to note as well, I slotted a picture in here that I'm just going to show. It's clearly late at night in station. Ops is almost deserted.
Yes. Yeah, those two have just left through those double doors into Sisko's office, and oh no, they're on the steps still, so they're walking towards it. And yes, there's no one else there. I assume because everyone else has been gathered on the promenade, and they're probably still gawking in the aftermath of the assassination. They've probably all gone to Quark's for a drink.
I would hope so, but I would also hope there were some people in Ops. And I think if you squint, there is one person sat at a station at the very back of Ops, so somebody's at least there if somebody suddenly attacks the station.
I think it's probably meant to give an impression that Sisko is burning the midnight oil. He's doing his due diligence by writing this report, and Kira is making a personal sacrifice by saying, "No, I want to join you in writing the report."
Precisely.
It's one little mark of the cooperation that they have together at the end of this episode, at the end of this series, a year after she was fighting Cardassians in a swamp. It's a really sweet little scene that just ties up this episode. As you said, this episode ends, there's no cliffhanger, everyone is for now safe, but we've set up Vedek Wynn as a fantastic villain for next time.
100% we have. Okay, so we talked a little bit in the setup, and we're not going to summarize the entire series because we are currently pushing 2 hours 27 minutes.
We are, but one thing I would like to do before the end of this is our co-conspirator, the indoor cat, kindly gave me and Tim a bit of insight into the US political situation, what was in the kind of the public sphere, what would have been in the press, what incidents, because I was particularly interested in knowing whenever there's an episode, I think particularly because of Duet last time, which had a lot of very explicit references to the Holocaust. So that was very much made in the context of a society which still remembers it, a society where there were people still alive who had been in the camps. This episode is about terrorism and about religious fundamentalism. So the way that I encounter it now, post 9/11, is very different from how people might have encountered it in the 90s.
Yeah.
So I wanted a little bit of insight into that. So the Indoor Cat very kindly gave some examples of things that had happened in the months running up to the episode being aired, possibly a bit too close to have been what the episode was based on. But these things would, I think, have informed how the audience received the episode. So the episode aired on the 21st of June, 1993. And Between February 28th and 19th of April that year, the Waco siege, which also became known as the Waco massacre, took place in McLennan County, Texas, 13 miles northeast of Waco. US federal government and Texas state law enforcement officials laid siege to a compound belonging to the religious cult known as the Branch Davidians. This was a very complex event. Thank you, Wikipedia, for giving me a brief overview of it. But I think it can be viewed as an instance of state versus religion. It raises questions of the extent of religious freedom and how much that can be held by individuals who are living within a state. And it's also an instance of people led by a charismatic religious leader in the form of David Koresh. I think that was such a standout incident, a standout event in American politics, that it would have been, any adults watching in the US or the UK and elsewhere would have been aware of it. And I think shades of those events would have been in their mind when watching the bombing of a school, watching the Federation versus the Bajoran religion, watching Frederick Winnard work. Another instance was that on February 26, 1993, a van bomb was detonated below the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex in New York City. The device was planted by members of the Islamic militant organization Al-Qaeda, and it was intended to collapse the skyscrapers. It failed to, but it killed 6 people and caused over 1,000 injuries. And again, it was in February. It's very likely that it had been scripted many months ahead of that. It might already have been filmed and wrapped by that point. But I think that instance would have been in the minds of the viewing public when seeing a bombing of a space station, an important public building where members of the public were present. I also wondered whether, particularly for a UK audience, the bombing of the school might have most quickly brought to mind the numerous IRA bombings of the 80s and early 90s.
Which has indeed been brought up in the chat. Dennis Bloodnock obviously saying, well, English audiences definitely have that resonance of IRA bombings. But obviously, as we are also discussing in chat, this was an American show made by American presenters where I think there was a different cultural view of the IRA, it's safe to say.
America has a large, and I assume had at that point, a large Irish expat community. There might have been very different sympathies.
There very much was, by all accounts, and I'm not.
We're both English rather than just British.
Yes.
So the views that, we were children at the time. I didn't see it at the time, but the views of the culture around us would probably have been, yes, markedly different from the views taken of the IRA by the American press.
100%, 100%. I mean, for me, I did see it at the time, but I didn't make the connection. I was a little bit too young to kind of see these kind of parallels. But I think definitely audiences would have looked at this and said, wow, yes, this happens on the news, and now it's happening on my spaceship show.
Yeah, and I think the use of the word terrorism all the more strongly ties it to the real world events that people were seeing. I also looked a little bit on Wikipedia, had a bit of information about Robert Hewitt Wolfe, the writer of the episode, and his religious background. They took from an interview, which you can find the details of on his Wikipedia page. He said, "I have no argument with someone having a fundamentalist belief in Christianity or Islam or Judaism or Buddhism or anything else, but I do have a serious objection to people trying to impose their values on other people. And that's what this episode is about. No one has the right to force anyone to believe the things they believe." And yeah, I think we both picked up on that as a strong thread in the episode. And it takes the assumption that if it is a-religious, it is necessarily more true, which is a point of view which I think has been brought into more philosophical question in recent years, particularly when it comes to science and scientific culture. The idea that science is always true and religion is always false.
Exactly. But I think such a level of discussion was not familiar or common to people, and
I don't think it was carried well to the audience. I think that the vast majority of people watching wouldn't have been familiar enough with the arguments to have taken them on board. And trying to express all of that in an episode of sci-fi television to an audience unfamiliar with it
would have been an incredibly tall order, and to a Star Trek audience, an audience that has grown up loving the purity of science, the potential of science, only that lovely good side of science, and if there's ever any bad science, it's punished. Genesis, as the first example that comes to mind, science run wild, it's seen ultimately as a dangerous bad
Star
thing.
Trek does have some good science ethics episodes, it must be said.
Exactly.
But yes, the view that a scientific education is necessarily just a neutral one is carried here.
Yes,
Um,
100%.
I also read on that Wikipedia page that Wolfe was raised as a Catholic, and he attributes the religious theme of the episode to his this would have been in the episode Wikipedia page. He attributes the religious theme of the episode to his influence, as well as his interest in history. He compares the religious intrigue of this story to the history of Catholicism in the 15th and 16th century, a time when various members of various families jostled for power to become pope. And when asked to describe the character of Wynne, Louise Fletcher said, "Think the Pope in space, except she's like an ancient Pope from the days when popes were ruthless and powerful and exerted their powers and fought wars and did all kinds of naughty things." Which is delightful.
I can see Kai Vedek Wynn. Oh God, we're gonna keep doing that. Vedek Wynn clearly read her Machiavelli, read Up on the Borgias, and it's clearly coming from that, and that multiple shows have shown that is just compelling, horribly, fascinatingly, infuriatingly compelling writing.
I do find it interesting that they referred to much older history that is unlikely to stir the blood of anyone hearing about it. And I don't know whether that will have been entirely ingenuous, that it really was about ancient Pope history, or whether it was, we can point to this without upsetting anyone if we point to more recent history, more recent religious movements. There are sensitivities that they might have provoked, even just in an interview with a magazine or on television. So I do wonder whether some of the Pope talk is a bit of a smokescreen.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Absolutely, I do think that's sadly very familiar. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I'm very keen to let people go. I'm delighted.
Yes, sorry.
That no, it's great. This is the passion. This is why we do this podcast, because we both love this show and we love Star Trek and we love talking about bigger concepts, which is what Star Trek is good at. I just don't want to exhaust everyone, but we have had a wonderful turnout in chat. I'm so grateful to all of you, and especially Lieutenant Indoor Cat for the wonderful moderating that goes on. But you've all engaged wonderfully, and I wish I had more time to respond to all the great ideas flowing out of chat. So I'm delighted everyone took part with this.
Yes, thank you all so much for, as Tim said, getting so engaged and being interested and just being here to listen to the podcast. It's lovely to have you here.
So Kat and I think we will have a discussion about Series 1 as a whole at some point. Just some thoughts on what we liked and what we didn't like Vortex. And then, as soon as quickly, we will get started on Season 2, because Kat is so excited to see what is going to come down and what they know is coming down the line. Like
Garak! On the sheer. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, we're all looking forward to it. And it's just, I think, very quickly, though, I think there is a cynical rule that the first series of a Star Trek show is a bit bumpy while they try and find their feet. What do you think? Even not thinking that you were doing a podcast, would you have been engaged to see more, do you think?
Oh, heck yes. Yeah, they've done a fantastic job of putting together a main cast of characters that are diverse, interesting. The relationships between them they're already intriguing to watch, and they're only going to become better defined over time. The chemistry between the characters and the actors is only going to get better as it goes. I've got the advantage of knowing that there are many seasons still to go, so I know that they've got space to expand upon all of this. I know that I'm not going to be cut short and disappointed by things hopefully not disappointed by things I want to see not being developed. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It's been a really nice, varied first season with so many different kinds of episodes and different things to enjoy in them. Yeah, I think there's probably something for everyone in Deep Space Nine, and I'm not surprised that it's many people's favourite iteration of Star Trek. I can see why that would be. And that's only season 1, and people keep telling me it's only going to get better. I'm so excited.
What I do find interesting for context, honestly, I'll shut up soon, is that you obviously have watched TNG a lot and love it. You've seen Lower Decks, you have seen Strange New Worlds, you're watching Enterprise, astonishingly enough, I never finished. You've seen
Not
Discovery.
Of the heart, Tim.
I never. I just can't get it, So that's fine. Plenty of faith in our heart to go around. So it will be interesting to see, with that context, how you continue to feel about DS9, how it stacks up against other parts of the franchise. So it's going to be super interesting. I'm really glad that you are still willing to go on with this, right? The podcast, I mean.
I damn well am. And thank you for sticking with it. And thank you to the listening audience as well. I'm aware that we often have many weeks at a time break due to busyness, often due to my chronic illness. I'm just too exhausted. I'm lying on the sofa watching Enterprise going, this is dreadful. I wish I was analysing Deep Space Nine right now. So thank you for being patient and waiting for me to be back and be able to do this again, both Tim and everyone else. I really appreciate it. I'm still absolutely loving doing this. Can't wait to
Wonderful.
do more.
Neither can we. It's going to be great. So, yes, you've all been super patient and we've had a lovely time with all of you. I'm going to let everyone go now and we will just return hopefully in a couple of weeks, maybe a little bit longer, and we will sum up all of Series 1 and then we will press straight on to Series 2. So, thank you, everyone. Take care, live long and prosper, all of you. Good night.